and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This time, are there any public comments?
Yes, we do have one public comment that came via email.
Okay.
Okay. This is comments in opposition of the petition to terminate easement at Gibson's Grant.
Okay. If I may ask, since that petition is related to a specific agenda item, that we take the public comment at that time?
After that?
Yep.
Gotcha.
That way we kind of keep everything together.
Cool. Then we are no public comments via email at this time.
So hearing no other opportunity for public comment, we'll close public comment. Meeting minutes from the October meeting.
Motion to approve.
I have a motion to approve by, was that Art?
Yes, sir.
We need to
Ebersberger?
change on this Mears Point. They have it down as to March 11th, 2020. Should be 21.
So Sharon, did you catch that errata? All right. So Mr. Ebersberger, looks like we had one correction. So with the correction, may I get a motion to approve the meeting minutes from October 8th?
So moved.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Hearing none, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Hearing none. Unanimous. Thank you. There are no extension requests this morning. So we will move forward with legislation and legal matters. Ms. Mordock.
Good morning.
Good morning. Guess we may introduce Ms. Mordock as the new planning director for planning and zoning for Queen Anne County. So for myself, and I'm sure on behalf of the Planning Commission, congratulations and welcome
Thank you
as
very much.
the director.
Thank you. I look forward to our continued positive. Pardon? I look forward to our continued positive relationship and sharing new challenges and solutions together moving forward. I have a few updates for you, and they're basic updates on legislation that we've been tracking for some time. The legislation 20-04, which is our resource conservation area, accessory dwelling unit provisions to allow for limited accessory dwelling units in the resource conservation area of the critical area. That was approved on the 13th of October by the county commissioners, and that legislation will become effective on the 28th of November. Likewise, the building code updates, the updates to our building code, chapter 10 of our Code of Public Laws, that is legislation 20-11. That was also approved on the 13th of October and will go into effect on the 28th of November. The alcohol production facility legislation 20-08. There was a hearing on that legislation on the 13th of October. That was a busy day. And on the 27th of October, the commissioners considered that legislation and decided not to approve it. So that legislation has failed. There was an express desire to remove the 2-acre production requirement and then to establish specific conditional use provisions for this use that looks at this minimum size of a property on which it would be appropriate to have such a facility. So staff will continue to revisit that language, and you should see it sometime in the near future. And like in the same vein, I was going to ask her to come here this morning, but since we're in a new location, I decided to wait until next month. But we do have a new senior planner on staff, Stephanie Jones, who has come to us with a lot of experience from Kent County as the environmental planner there. She was the acting planning director for some time in Kent County as well. So we were lucky to get her on staff, and she started 2 weeks ago. And so she will be assisting with text amendments and with our comprehensive plan update. You do have before you a comprehensive plan process update that we requested from our consultants, Wallace Montgomery. So Lauren Good did provide you with a thorough update on our comp plan. Otherwise, I see that Mr. Drummond has walked into the room, and I know that he'll probably want to give you a legislative update on the Public Service Commission's CPCN rulemaking actions that we have set in on a couple of meetings about, and he's representing us in that charge.
In August or September, the Public Service Commission sent out a notice that it intended to initiate a rulemaking exercise for utility-scale solar, and invited comments from anyone that wished to comment on or before November 2nd of this year. The notice of the intent to initiate rulemaking was frankly somewhat, or appeared to be somewhat solicitous of the, quote, concerns of solar developers who have complained that the Public Service Commission process is cumbersome, subject to delays and uncertainty as a consequence of two things primarily. One is local jurisdictions' interference, and two, the public power plant research programs, which is PPRP. You'll hear that frequently in this context. The PPRP's policy that the solar applicants run through the local zoning process as either before or as a part of the solar developer's request for approval for large-scale solar. So on behalf of Queen Anne's County and Dorchester County, I submitted comments. Frederick County submitted some comments. Not surprisingly, the solar industry, through its trade association, submitted lengthy comments, as did the PPRP. There's been a series of Zoom conferences among representatives of counties, PCS staff, PPRP, solar industry, and it would appear that frankly, that the Public Service Commission is looking for is a so-called completeness checklist. And that is, what does a solar applicant need to submit to allow a CPCN application to move forward? On behalf of the county, Kent County's also been participated in, as has Caroline County, at least one of the meetings. Frederick County has been very insistent that a complete application to the Public Service Commission level include evidence that there has been a complete local zoning process. We're not quite as committed to that requirement because it's probably not going to prevail. We have asked the Public Service Commission to consider making sure that the solar developers have provided to the counties, before a completeness determination, all of the materials submitted to the Public Service Commission, some sort of a concept plan of the project that would include things like screening, landscaping, buffering, some concept of stormwater management, sediment erosion, some, like you would see in a normal concept plan. We understand what a concept plan is. The Public Service Commission staff was sort of scratching their heads. And that there be at least one technical or stack committee meeting, essentially, with the counties before an application is deemed complete. The Public Service Commission staff is now reviewing all the comments, and we'll see what comes out of it. I have the sense that the staff, Public Service Commission staff at least, is looking for a middle ground. Whether the Public Service Commission generally is or not, we don't know yet. There's this real tension between how much information, how much of the local process must an applicant submit itself to, either before or during the CPCN process. That's what's going on at the moment.
I think a part of our concern and the reason that we're so engaged in this dialogue is that as the governor's renewable energy portfolio goals have been shared, local jurisdictions have reacted and have been proactive in addressing utility scale solar provisions. And most local jurisdictions have enacted pretty reasonable requirements. Queen Anne's County is a really good example. We have a lot of land available, and we have a reasonable process. And we have all been asked to learn about the governor's initiatives and to learn a brand new process through the Public Service Commission, which is very unique to itself. And there is a genuine lack of understanding of a general local planning review. And so we're continuing to try to be reasonable in our approach to have a seat at that table so that a full preemption decision doesn't land on our doorstep and we lose all semblance of local zoning control. But we really have been advocating for the fact that we do have a reasonable ordinance that supports solar energy, and that is a certificate of public need, a necessity and convenience. That is a requirement of those findings and of that completeness review, is that a reasonable attempt to meet reasonable provisions has been made. So
there are statutory requirements at the state level that an applicant has to meet, which is really the nub of the argument. The Public Service Commission is required to take into account whether or not a proposed solar facility is consistent with the county's comprehensive plan. And it is it's the applicant's burden to demonstrate if the location is inconsistent, why the project should be approved anyway. Moreover, the applicant is obliged to demonstrate to the Public Service Commission what efforts it's made to resolve differences with local jurisdictions. And it's in that context that we're asking for you might call a semi-formal pre-completeness review and process with the local governments. Frederick County takes the position that there's no way for an application to be complete until the local government says whether a project is consistent with the comp plan and also says what its zoning ordinance would do with the project. That is, permitted, not permitted, and so on. And therefore, how can the applicant proceed with an application until there's some definitive answer as to consistency and what the disputes will be between the locals and the solar developer? I'm afraid that one is probably not going to prevail because the pressure is on to get these things built. And anything that materially slows them down, such as a full-fledged county process, which in the bigger counties can take a year or more, I don't think that's going to work.
We would just like to assess, is the project proposed in our zoning district, which allows it, and give us a cursory conceptual review to substantiate that. And if it's not located in the appropriate zoning district, then we'll make that finding. We can do that.
Yeah, you can do that at concept, with a concept plan. These are not slowing down. I understand that recently the PGMQ, which is where folks go basically first. PGM is a regional entity that controls the grid in essentially from North Carolina to Pennsylvania, west of Ohio. And PJM has a queue, a waiting list, so to speak, that you get on. And that's essentially the first step. We want to put X number of megawatts into the grid. And here's the substation that we propose to interconnect through. And it's my understanding that recently a project went on the PGMQ with a substation in this county, and if you calculate it out what the requested megawatts are, it's about 600 acres. So there's a 600-acre project under review now in Dorchester County. So it's coming. It's not going away.
Well, thank you both for those updates. Solar. So next on our agenda is the text amendment 20-13, cottage home planned residential development.
Commissioners, good morning. I'm on text amendment duty this morning, so lucky you guys. So as mentioned, this is 20-13 regarding cottage homes. Going back to September, if the Planning Commission remembers, staff presented a memo to them regarding a use determination from our former director about a housing category that's not identified in the county code currently. Obviously, that would be the cottage homes. After the discussion that day, the Planning Commission directed staff to create a text amendment for the cottage homes as a multifamily use within the county. Cottage homes in Queen Anne's County would quite simply be detached condominiums. So the individual would own the unit, and the group of condo owners would wholly own the land. They'd share ownership of the land, just as in a typical condo regime. These units would be intended to provide more diverse housing opportunities in Queen Anne's County, and due to their modest size and smaller land requirements, they should also be a bit more affordable than a traditional house, therefore providing home ownership opportunities potentially to folks that may not otherwise have them. They would meet needs of a buyer who wants less home and less yard to maintain, but still wants that sense of community that a traditional neighborhood would provide. And as proposed in the text amendment, these would be permitted in the 16 districts that currently permit multifamily use. Those districts are listed in your staff report, and the first attachment to the staff report is a table showing each of those districts and whether or not the use would be permitted or a conditional use in those particular districts. So if you flip to the last page in the staff report, it's a fold-out color map. So I'm a visual person, and I didn't want to sit here and just read this memo to you. So what I tried to do was provide a color-coded visual representation of this text amendment. Hopefully it's not terribly confusing, but I'll go over it and explain everything. So if we look at on the left-hand side, number 1, written in green, The first standards, the minimum landscape surface for each unit would be 450 square feet. And looking on the right-hand side, this is just a clip of a part of the presentation that was shown to you in September. In the green bubbled areas, this standard could potentially be met in there. So for 5 units, that would roughly equate to 2,250 square feet of landscape area that they potentially could plant in those green areas. Number 2, the residential density. That would be calculated based upon the density in which the project is proposed. So in this case, this property is located in the GBC zoning district, which permits 10 units per acre. This parcel is 0.6 acres, so 6 units would be permitted. Obviously, only 5 are shown. So number 3, moving down, as I mentioned, these are meant to be modest in size. So the minimum square footage would be 800 square feet, maximum of 1,200 square feet. Moving on to number 4, the blue dashed line would be the setbacks. Everything has setbacks, front, side, and rear. Number 5, the spacing between units. So these, again, would be detached units. So they'd be spaced a minimum of 10 feet, a maximum of 15. This would permit things such as HVAC, maybe a propane tank or a fireplace chimney, something to that effect, to be placed on the side, and still allow for any stormwater disconnect that may be needed in there, perhaps a lawnmower to get through. Number 6, off-street parking requirements. This isn't unique, so our apartments and condos currently require 1.5 spaces for a 1-bedroom unit, 2 spaces for a 2-bedroom unit. Let's just assume that all these are 2-bedroom units. That would be 10 spaces required for this. There are 13 shown, so the additional 3 perhaps could be for visitors. The units should be, or shall be, located on a centralized parking area or courtyard. So what this does is cluster the units together, allowing for much more compact development and providing for that sense of community that I mentioned. And letter D of number 6, the parking areas need to be screened from roads and adjacent uses. So that's what the brown dots are showing. I will note that letter D could also be used.
That's not MIH affiliated, should be able to see it. Or they're asking the parking.
Not exactly sure what that was. So again, letter D, the brown circles along the outside edges, the screening for the parking areas. The requirements of number 1 could also be met partially or wholly with letter D. And last, the maximum building height is 28 feet, which is similar for the townhomes that's currently in the county code. So if the Planning Commission eventually decides to agree with this amendment, and staff is asking that you forward a favorable recommendation to the county commissioners regarding this text amendment. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions. I know the housing department, I'm not sure if it got into your packets, but laid before you this morning was a support memo from the housing department in support of this text amendment.
Yeah, Mr. Clark sent over a memo that Mr. Shelton provided for us this morning.
Great.
Mr. Waterman, would you like to come up and, I believe you propose this text amendment?
Good morning. Yes, that's correct. I did. Interestingly, since I gave you guys that presentation, I've been approached by several other people, landowners in the county who had been contemplating building either townhouses or an apartment building, who thinks this is a really interesting alternative that they're considering. I know one of them's outside today to hear what you guys are thinking. So this proposed text amendment works for me. You know, where it goes long term, I don't know. Looking around the country, there are places where cottage homes are the rage and they're ridiculously expensive. That's not my intent. That's not the intent of this ordinance. It may or may not be something somebody proposes in the future and you guys can consider it at that point. But this is right up the alley of what we were thinking would work for us.
Right. Now, the price points in general for a cottage house versus a traditional townhouse, what's a rough percentage
They're going to be they're going to basically be the same. I mean, if you build a townhouse, you have to build a firewall, but you got the same foundation, the same roof. The cottage homes might actually be a little more expensive to build than a townhouse because we're going to make them more interesting looking so they fit in. I mean, if we just take a plain townhouse and spread them out, they still look like a townhouse. But if you put a porch on them and you put some more detailing on them, that's going to make them fit into some of our older communities a lot better than just a townhouse. So that's our intent, is to make these interesting houses, but smaller than typical houses on smaller ground, and thus they can be more affordable than single-family houses. They may be more they would be more for me in what I'm planning than if I had done the townhouse. But it's just basically going to be the cost of the porches and architectural features.
Thank you.
Should this move forward, any tweaks through implementation that we see over the coming years would be able to be modified through the comp plan process. So Amy and I have discussed this topic and whether we need more or less, or bigger communities more than 10 or less than 4, could be tweaked and run through the comp plan process to find out the overall feel of the entire county.
Question, as far as the parking, this is the current parking guidelines that you use already, 1.5 for a 1-bedroom and
Yes, sir.
2. Do you anticipate that there will be any difference in demand for parking since these are going to be individual homes?
No, because they're roughly the same size as a typical apartment or condo unit.
Okay.
So therefore, we just carried over.
Okay.
A lot of times you do run into some parking issues, not so much with the residents, but with visitors. So this one, we don't like to overpark things. We tend to overpark everything. However, in this case, if these were all 2-bedroom and it required 10, I wouldn't make comment on the additional 3 parking spaces of 13 because my mother lives in an over-under condo in Crofton. And I rarely go visit because I have to park a half a mile away. There's just no parking where she lives. So I got to park on a main street and trudge my kids through any weather that may exist. And these are probably going to be built on lots like this, small in size. So you're not going to get an overabundance of parking because you still have to finagle this to meet all the other standards as well. There's impervious cover standards and such. So,
If I might add, to a large extent, the developer of whatever the project is has to take that into account. Whether you're renting or selling, if you underpark the project, you can't sell the units. And of course, if you overpark it, you're wasting money. So try to come up with a reasonable balance that it's not going to create a problem in the future.
I have a question, Mr. Chairman, for, I guess, probably both gentlemen. And that is, it's my recollection that former Director Wisnowski reviewed this request from Mr. Waterman only for the GBC, right? That was your original intent, assuming that's just where your business is centered, so therefore that was sort of your focus. And with your chart, Mr. Gunter, you obviously have looked at other districts, and were there similar conflicts or situations that existed that Mr. Wisnowski did not look at? I mean, this board has in the past gone above and beyond applicants requested, and we have been warned respectfully and politely and professionally by staff to sort of pull back on that to allow you to determine that the ripple effect of some of our actions. And sort of now I'm asking the same question of staff is, obviously this chart is much more comprehensive, right? This one you pointed to, much more comprehensive than solely the GBC, which started this conversation. So I'm presuming that staff has looked at all of those other situations and have come to a similar conclusion, or that it's maybe better or not in those respective additional jurisdictions that are added in your chart. Is that correct?
So,
sorry for a long-winded question.
You are correct in that the cottage home, as proposed, does not fit into any of the other zoning categories.
Okay.
The reason it was included in all categories is because we were directed, Mr. Waterman asked, and it does make sense that these are multifamily uses. So quite simply, we added a word, cottage home, 2 words, cottage homes into the definition of multifamily, and then thus every district that allows multifamily would thereby allow a cottage
Play
home.
by the same rules, same set of standards.
And they all have different density calculations, depending on, some of them are similar to each other. The GVC, GNC, I believe, are the same. So depending on where they are throughout the county, that density calculation will change. And most of these are built on sewer anyway, so some of the districts don't have sewer, so they're not going to get built there anyway. But for consistency, it needed to be in all
Across the
16
board.
districts.
Right. And this does not impact the incorporated jurisdictions?
No, it does not.
Right.
And if I might add to that, the only place that cottage homes would be allowed if you give a favorable recommendation that commissioners adopt it are places where townhouses or apartment buildings are already a permitted use. So this is just an alternative to what's already types of houses that are allowed, and in a lot of those locations, they may be substantially preferable. That said, even though it's expanded to those other places, there really are only a very few places where this could happen, because not only do you need public sewer, you need public water, because you can't serve a house with a well with less than 10,000 square foot lot. So you have to have public water for this to work as well.
Because of required setbacks from the health department or
Health department
Yeah,
regulations,
right.
yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions of the commission? Thank you, Mr. Waterman. Documents mixed up. So for the commission, I think it's important that we understand that this is purely a vote on the text amendment. This is not anything to do with Mr. Waterman's proposed project that he had brought forward.
Yeah, I reiterate that.
Yeah.
There is no project here for this. It's not permitted currently. So we would hand it
Exactly.
back and say, thanks, but no thanks. You can't do this right now.
So at this time, I'll entertain a motion from the commission for a favorable or unfavorable recommendation to the planning or to the county commissioners.
I'll make a motion that the Planning Commission forward a favorable recommendation to the Board of County Commissioners to introduce and schedule a public hearing for County Ordinance Number 20-13 in accordance to Chapter 18.
Second.
You want to add findings?
So, Kathy, there's 2 bullet points in there that.
Oh, I'm sorry, the land use article.
Yeah, so if you may introduce those as part of your findings with your motion.
Okay. I'll amend my motion to introduce the land use article. The proposed amendment is consistent with the definition of planned residential development. Further, as a new type of multifamily use, the cottage home is consistent with the purpose of the districts in which this use would now be permitted. And with regard to the comprehensive plan, the proposed amendment is consistent with many goals, principles, and strategies identified in the plan. Specifically, the proposal is consistent with the goals and strategies that seek to establish a range of affordable housing choices and opportunities.
So we have a motion with amendment. Mr. Lay, do you
I
keep
will
your second?
I will re-second.
Thank you very
Or
much.
third it.
Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, we'll take vote. All in favor, say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Hearing none. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for your work, Mr.
Very
Gunther,
helpful.
Mr. Waterman.
I agree. Thank you. Appreciate the turning the commas and semicolons and
Right.
into
I
something a little
can't-
more digestible.
I can't look at that.
Right, no.
That was very helpful.
That's one of the main reasons I do not enjoy text amendments.
Next up on our agenda is projects, and we will hear from Gibson's Grant, the petition to terminate the easement of the Waterfront Park and Community Pier. Ms. Morduck?
Thank you. Okay. There's very little in the way of a staff report for you for this application, other than to note that this is a request that was kind of bandied about between Ms. Valerie Hirsch and Chris Drummond, our planning attorney, as to whether or not there was a path for this consideration to request the termination of easement. Initially, we were of the opinion that the community pier and waterfront area had been included in the growth allocation findings, but upon further investigation, it looks as though that growth allocation that is specific to the 55-acre conservation easement is a separate area, and that is why this application was filed with the county commissioners who holds the easement for this access agreement, and there is a provision in the covenants that would allow for alteration if the county were in favor of that alteration. So since that public amenity was a part of the subdivision approval and that easement went into effect as a result of a condition of that approval, this application is before you. For all intents and purposes, we're looking at an amendment to the 2006 subdivision approval. So the objective here that has been put before you by the Homeowners Association, specifically the Gibson's Grant Pier Usage Committee, is to consider this petition to terminate the public easement, and I'll let the Homeowners Association explain their desires. And your actions are basically, you could take three paths. You can find that their request is consistent with the approval. With that approval, you're also looking at the growth allocation conditions, you're looking at the covenants that are in place and the relevant areas noted on the subdivision plat. You might recommend in support of denying that petition, citing that the request is inconsistent to the intent of that approval, or there's a middle ground. You might look at some of the requests favorably and not others, saying that citing rules of operation and conduct might serve for the community pier and the waterfront area, waterfront park, or not. So you have several avenues available to you. You also received a memorandum from the Department of Parks and Rec relative to public access of our waterfront lands, and specifically the need on the island. So I'll now defer.
Can I weigh in a little bit? The Gibson's Grant project was the subject of quite a bit of scrutiny, controversy, delay, so on. I think it even stretched over one or more election cycles. It began its life as 600 or 700 units and a commercial component. It eventually became 288 or something like that units with 55 acres of so-called conservation area near the highway, described by an opponent of Gibson's Grant at the time as a golf, I think he called it a putt-putt course on steroids, or something like that. So there was quite a bit of back and forth about what the project would look like ultimately, and what the growth allocation approval would and would not allow. I do not, as I've said in my emails, specifically remember don't specifically remember what conversations or conditions or promises, if that's the right word, were made regarding a community pier. It is clear from looking at the ordinance, I think it's 0519, that the community pier is not expressly made a condition of growth allocation. There is, however, the more general language about providing public a variety of amenities. And of course, it is included in the Gibson's grant restrictive covenants, which I did review and approve, as perhaps did Pat Thompson, for consistency with the growth allocation approval. That's the background. It's the best I can recall of it 16, 17 years later.
And just to note, if you have follow-up questions regarding the memorandum you received from Parks and Rec, Natural Resource Planner, Parks Planner Nancy Scazzari is out in the hallway, so if you had any questions for her, she's here to answer them. No. If you signal to me when you'd like your presentation queued, I'll do that too.
Could you go ahead and put it up, put it on slide 2?
That's the one, yep.
This one.
And I brought copies for the commissioners of my remarks. Okay, thanks, Tom.
That's yours. I think it's yours.
Good morning. If you guys could please identify yourself and where you're from and before you start your presentation, we would greatly appreciate it.
My name is Valerie Hirsch. I'm a homeowner in Gibson's Grant since 2014 and chair of the Gibson's Grant Community Association's Pier Usage Committee. I'm joined by Jack Smith, president of the Community Association and homeowner since 2011.
Morning.
Our slide will show you highlighted. The pier is the yellow area, and then the red area, excuse me, is the 55-acre conservation area, which is required by a county ordinance and was required in order for the development to go forward. So the main point here is you can see clearly that the pier is not within the 55-acre conservation area. First, on behalf of the association, we'd like to thank the Planning Commission staff, in particular Amy Murdoch and John Shelton, as well as the Planning Commission attorney Chris Drummond and District 3 County Commissioner Phil Dumanel for their guidance and counsel, which has enabled us to appear before the Planning Commission today. As explained in detail in our petition, the association respectfully requests that the county provide approval to terminate the public easement for Gibson's Grant Community Pier and Waterfront Park area. Such approval is required pursuant to the Declaration of Covenants for Gibson Grant, which provides, quote, "The association shall not terminate said easement without express written approval of Queen Anne's County, Maryland." Gibson Grant became possible through reclassification of property premised upon legislative conditions, including dedication of a 55-acre conservation area that would be open for passive recreation for the general public, as provided by Queen Anne's County Ordinance 5-19. It's important to note that the Community Pier and Waterfront Park are not located in the 55-acre conservation area and are not subject to Ordinance 5-19. Hitting the right one? There we go. Okay, so this is odd.
Got an assistant.
Oops, I went too many times. Okay. There we go. That's the plat. Pink up there is the pier, and once again, the gray shaded area is the 55-acre conservation area. And then can I just make this flow through?
If you let me know, I have control over here.
Oh, awesome.
That's, because it's a movie, that's probably not going to work.
Okay. We have some more slides just to show you the area so that you can visualize it. The waterfront park and the pier are, it's not a large area. So, The association has found no evidence in Planning Commission meeting minutes that the pier and park were required by the county to be open to the public as part of the original development conditions. However, the developer's recollection is that they committed to making the pier public as part of the negotiations with the county, and therefore the public easement was included in the declaration. The developer has transferred full ownership of the pier and waterfront park to the association. The initiative to make the pier and park community-only formally began last October because of numerous worsening challenges as the word spread that the pier is open to the public, including overcrowding, all-day picnics by non-community members with coolers, chairs, and umbrellas blocking passage, destruction of property, littering, violating catch and release, and significant damage to the protected environmental area around the pier and along the adjacent shoreline as the public uses the pier to enter protected areas. There is no designated parking, nor are there any public toilet facilities near the pier or waterfront park, which have created additional significant problems. The association has incurred added expenses for repairs of damage caused by non-community members. These problems were likely unforeseen when the developer and the county agreed to make the pier open to the public. The association is asking the county to reconsider the public easement in light of these unforeseen challenges. The association has full financial responsibility for the pier, the waterfront park, and the 55-acre conservation area. All maintenance and upkeep expenses for the conservation area, a public park open to all, not just Queen Anne's County residents, are paid by the homeowners through conservation area assessments, which make up part of their monthly homeowners' dues. We do not receive any public funding. A deed of conservation easement is granted to CBEC for annual conservation maintenance. Judy Wink, Executive Director of CBEC, is an honorary, non-voting member of the Board of Directors of the Association. Ms. Wink fully endorses this petition and has personally witnessed the unforeseen challenges stated in our petition. Annual expenses for the Conservation Park, Community Pier, and Waterfront Park include $15,000 to CBEC for maintenance of the 55 acres, $35,000 to Envirotech to maintain the areas that are not covered by CBEC. This number does include some ponds that are not in the 55 acres. Roughly $2,000 in repairs and maintenance of the dock and other facilities located at the pier. Annual reserve allocation of $1,750 to CBEC for future work on the 55 acres. And in addition, since this petition was submitted, $16,000 of reserves have been allocated to repair severe erosion damage around the pier. These expenses do not reflect the countless volunteer hours of Gibson Grant residents dedicated to extra maintenance and repair of the pier, the park, and the conservation area. In conclusion, given that the Community Pier and Waterfront Park are not located in the 55-acre conservation park, the public health and other issues that have arisen from public use of the pier and park, and the unreasonable financial burden of maintaining a public pier, waterfront park, and a public conservation park, the association respectfully requests that the county approve termination of the easement for the Community Pier and Waterfront Park area. If you look at the slides, that shows the little waterfront park area. Are they going through?
Yeah, we went through.
Okay.
You want to start over?
Yeah, you could just. Okay, there's the pier out into the Chester River. As you can see, it's not that wide. It becomes overcrowded easily. That is the environmental area right next to the pier, so you can see how easy it is for the public to just pop on down there and start destroying our grasses and defecating. We've had all kinds of problems. Littering. You can see the erosion in that picture. That's the pavilion.
Can you go back to the erosion?
Yeah. Right there. Look at that. That's like become a cliff along there. And the really, really bad erosion that the $16,000 reserve funds are going to be used for is right on each side of the pier. We've had to move those environmental signs back and back. Eventually, it's just going to be the whole way into the...
Yeah, if I can interject, what we've done is some of that erosion was there before the community was built, but to mitigate that erosion, we've planted grasses along that environmentally protected area. But what happens is when people jump off before they get on the pier, they walk along the grasses and destroy the grasses, and they fish from down there. Now, people who live in Gibson Grant know not to do that, fish from the pier, but we don't seem to be able to enforce that because we have the open policy. Anybody can come in. They walk along the whole shoreline and do damage to the grasses.
Right, and as it stands now, because the pier is public, we cannot tell people you can't be on that pier if you're not part of the community. So it's, it just puts us in a position of not being able to enforce people not going into that area.
You notice those signs on either side of the pier that they do not enter. That's just for the environmental area, not for the pier. We've had to move those signs back 3 times now as the area has eroded around the entrance to that pier. So that's why this Saturday we're having a community cleanup along the beach to move some rocks back into place to create a better barrier. And then we've got a contract we're ready to sign with Envirotech to put in some gabion barriers on both sides of the gabion boxes with rocks and earth on both sides of the pier to stabilize the pier. We're afraid that the pier is going to wash away unless we do something to protect it. But it's from traffic jumping off of the pier down to the beach.
So there you can see also, the pavilion, and then you can see how close the houses are. That is just a 2-way road in between there. There is no dedicated parking. Once again, no toilet facilities. We've had some destruction of furniture in that Waterfront Park area, and the developer had put furniture there, etc. All of this is going to, fall on. This all falls onto us now as far as repairs and replacement of furniture and facilities. I know I've had several community members have written in. So, John, were you able to put that in their packets? So, we had firsthand witness testimony of what people have seen and the destruction that's happened. And I mean, recently we were having book club there, and a party of kids from outside of the community came and started setting up their coolers during our book club. So.
It's become a management problem for us. We have responsibility for the care and upkeep of this recreation area in the pier, deeded over to us by the developer, but now we have outside groups using the facility, but we charge $150 to rent the pier to our own residents, and we do that because we need money to upkeep in this area. So we've got a situation where we've got people using that pavilion area in the pier that are not helping us maintain that pier. So that's our dilemma. Nor do we have enforcement. We don't have anybody, we don't have a manager on site. We don't have anybody who can go down there and chase people off. It's an awkward situation. If we had it posted for Gibson Grant residents only, then we'd have some support from the county. We'd be glad to tell them, you can't do this, but we would have to, at some point, call a deputy and say, they refuse to move. Right now, we don't have that because they have the right to be there. And as the community has grown, we're up to 250, 60 houses now. It's going to max out at 280. I think we're up to like 260. The use of the pier and the need for using the pier in that area has increased with our own community. So that's why recently it has become more and more of a problem. We have more people that want to use that area. Plus, Gibson's Grant Pier has been discovered. And lots of people know about it now as a free place to go fish. And believe me, we do have 4 other pond areas where people come in and fish, and the word is out, you can get some nice bass fish and catfish in those ponds. It's catch and release in our ponds. And we deal with that. They don't do a lot of damage to our environment by creating paths down to the water. There's some littering that we clean up, but in many cases we see fathers and sons out there fishing,
And I think that's a good thing, and the community is supportive of people using those fishing areas. As long as they clean up after themselves, we think that's fine. But this has become a focal point of...
Can you show us where those ponds might be in the big
Sure,
map?
we have to go back to the original,
To the
first...
satellite photo. Yeah, so, yeah, all the ponds in, I've had some people who've been down in the environmental area, and I said, you can't be down there, you know, if you want to fish, we've got a 55-acre conservation park down there with great fishing. Please, you know, go down there.
Yeah. Right across the front, there are two up there. That's pond 1 and that's pond 3. There's pond 1 and 2 on either side of that, the road coming in. And then in the back there, closer to the, beyond the Gibson's Grant Clubhouse, there are 2 ponds back in that area too. Right there, and yeah, that's one pond. And then to the right a little bit more, there's another pond over there, yes. And they have fish.
Thank you.
Questions?
Any other questions for us?
I have one for you. Where is it predominantly that residents park when they use the pavilion and waterfront?
Well, most of them walk to it or have golf carts that they take up there. But if they do, they do have to park right next to that pavilion, and then there's a street in front of Winchester Street. So, but you know, it's just narrow.
That will become an issue to us when the roads are turned over to the county. We may request some no parking signs out there. Right now, where the majority of the residents and the people who are coming in park is right next to the model home where nobody lives yet. But I can assure you, as soon as somebody moves in there, it's going to become a parking problem.
So, but because this is all conversational and definitely not confrontational, right. I'm just going to ask some very pointed questions.
Okay.
I was down there Saturday. I spoke with some of your residents that were enjoying the pier, and I identified myself, and they let me know that they've lived there over a year. They've never seen an overcrowding problem. In the documents you provided to us, there was 2 pictures. One with a family fishing on the pier, which you've clearly stated that you support family and, you know, father, son, father, daughter, mother, son, whatever activities. The pier is small. The pier's maybe at best 120 square feet, roughly, give or take. I mean, it's not that large. The fishing probably isn't that great because it's extremely shallow. You mentioned a cost in here of $2,000 to maintain the pier, and
that's cumulative repairs paid so far.
Okay, over the last 8 to 10 years.
No, over the last 2 years since we took it over.
Okay, but that includes general maintenance. Anytime you have that, and the pavilion's beautiful, by the way, and the pier, with that much usage, whether it be by your own residents or, you know, some by the public, I think there's a general expectation for maintenance. What are the general HOA fees? Are they based by square footage, or are they done just as a flat fee?
I could cut through and tell you that we've just added the pier to our reserve fund, the maintenance of the pier, because we have to plan out for that for eventual redecking or replacement. You probably, in talking to somebody who's only been there for a year, the usage of the pier has been down dramatically because of COVID. There are not a lot of people doing anything. But before the COVID hit, it was, particularly on the weekends, very crowded with families who came to spend the day. And like I said, my biggest concern is there are no bathroom facilities out there. So people are relieving themselves out on our bank. And then the parking is an issue when the people have started to move in along that front now. Those spaces in front of their houses are being taken up.
But your own residents had parked out there on the street as well.
Excuse me?
Your own residents had parked out there on the street on the narrow 2-lane, as it was described.
Yeah.
So what were the HOA fees? I don't think you mentioned that to me.
We had,
What is it now?
there's 3 levels.
Yeah, townhouses and duplexes and single-family homes are different depending upon the size of the yards. But it's around, what, 230, something like that? I don't know. I
I don't want to
have that
misstate. We
information
can
right
get back to you with that.
If I may inject, since I'm on the
Yes.
Finance Committee at Gibson Green,
Can-
Arts on the Finance
and I do
Committee.
need to clarify, I could be conflicted in this because I'm a resident of Gibson's Grant, but, it does vary by size home, and it goes up to 255, and that will increase roughly 3% a year on a go-forward basis. So that, I just inject that.
Thank you.
As I stated in my comments, and it's in the petition as well, as far as the homeowners' dues percent that goes towards the conservation park, that is in the declaration, and so the homeowners association has to dedicate a certain amount of each fee to conservation, the 55-acre conservation area.
Right. So next question I have. In your general declaration of covenants and conditions, attachment 6, 11.4, I know most people hopefully have purchased a home at one time in their life, and you get, a ream of paper. You get 2 or 3 inches of paper. I'm sure this covenant was sent to, or part of all those closing documents in which everyone received. Now I'm just going to read this verbatim. It's attachment 6 in the Declaration of Covenants and Conditions and Restrictions for Lieber 630, folio 770. This is 11.4. Perpetual, non-exclusive easement and common area available for public use. Certain portions of the common area, specifically the conservation area, the Cross Island Trail, public path network,
I'm sorry.
waterfront park areas, and community pier, but accepting the community center and facilities, shall be the same hereby and are declared to be subject to a perpetual non-exclusive easement for use by the general public of said conservation area, Cross Island Trail, public path network, waterfront park areas, and community pier for pedestrian and passive recreational uses only, subject to the reasonable rules and regulations of the development and subject at all times to the conservation easement. The easement for public use constitutes servitude upon the land and runs with the land, and the association shall not terminate said easement without the express written approval of Queen Anne County, Maryland. So, it's pretty clear that the development, all the lawyers that everybody paid to have this happen, basically said this is going to live in perpetuity, forever. I understand you're coming here to ask for permission to change that. I just don't know if I've been convinced yet that that's something that, and I'm only one vote. I would like to have questions all over because we received a lot of documents, so please bear with me. Has the HOA entertained the idea of instituting rules of, maximum occupancy on the pier of, 3 people or 4 people, no drinking, no alcohol, pavilion shall be rented, call this number to rent, no unauthorized use? If it's rented, you're still allowing public use, but it has to be rented or reserved. Maybe not rented, maybe reserved is a better word. Has the HOA tried to do anything like that?
HOA was not aware that we could put restrictions on a public pier.
Yeah,
Well,
my understanding is public, and you don't restrict it. I know
So
that the county's had problems with that in their parks.
So this document says, subject to reasonable rules and regulations of the development. I would say a reasonable rule might be no alcohol on the pier, maximum occupancy 6 people, or I think those are reasonable expectations from my point, especially as a building code official. You can say, I can have 1 person for every 200 square feet on a pier. That's not the correct number by any means. But then that would make it 2 people. So you can set up certain rules. The county has rules for all our parks that we have to follow, and that might provide some additional enforcement. I am going to ask Nancy to come up and kind of testify or give us some opinions and thoughts on the enforcement issues.
I think it's of some significance that servitude that was just read in easement refers to pedestrian and passive recreational uses. I'm not sure that it seems to me reasonable that passive recreation may not include arriving with umbrellas, coolers, and blankets and so on, and setting yourself up for the day is necessarily passive recreation, particularly when you combine it with the immediately preceding word, pedestrian.
I would
My
also,
point is that reasonable rules and regulations seems to me might include limitations on time, limitations on activities, so on and so forth.
I would just counter your suggestion that it would be, I mean, we're a small homeowners association. It would be much easier for us, or much more doable, if it was community members only to enforce such rules. I understand from the Queen Anne's Public Parks, they've got people streaming in, they don't follow the rules, and it's very difficult to enforce it. So I'm not sure how if we can't say, hey, this is community only, you're not a community member, please go down to the 55-acre park. We're giving them an alternative. You know, we can't, can we, if they're just not following the rules, do we have the right to call the police and?
Yes.
Well, I repeat the point. It just, our community members, you know, are pretty much follow rules and stuff, and we can, and they're, you know, all joined together because they're paying for that pier to protect it. We you know, we can't expect that of all the public members. As to your point about, was it in your closing documents when you bought your house? Yes, the entire declaration was in there. This is page 41 of the declaration. So, you know, and I know when my husband and I moved in, the developer had a sign along there, and you can still see it in their advertisement materials. That sign said, this is a community pier for community members only. It was completely misleading. So we had no idea when we moved in that that was a public pier. And I would say the vast majority of people don't understand that. When the homeowners association took over the pier, we did the right thing and we took that sign down.
And we greatly appreciate that, Ms. Hirsch. And I can say that the developer, some of the partners, and that they created unique opportunities for the county, and for lack of better words. But we do appreciate, you know, you doing the right thing and changing the signs out the way they should be. And we do recognize that and appreciate it.
Mr. Chair?
Yes, ma'am.
If I may, I'm not sure that these people would even be here if it wasn't for the age of COVID, which presented a lot of challenges to any areas, any communities that have extensive outdoor recreation areas. This has been a challenge for the county, who's had to redirect staff, and we saw the challenges the county went through with trying to limit it to Queen Anne's County residents only, and that presented its own challenges. And then going to a capacity issue required signage, and then redirecting Parks and Rec staff to entrances to some of these recreation areas. But as we all know, there are many ways to enter these areas. I think that if this were not for the age of COVID, I probably would say, well, do you have a couple of members irritated that people from outside of the community are fishing? That would be my attitude, but I see even in my own community, areas that are not public access, that there are people who are seeking to get outdoors, who are are coming to our county, and I'm grateful that I'm a resident of this county. So I understand that the age of COVID has turned us upside down in so many ways, and I think this is one of them, and it's very challenging. But I do have one question is, if someone becomes injured on that pier, they fall off the pier, they tumble down the rocks, who is liable for, if the injured party decides to sue, who is responsible for that? Who would?
It's my understanding that we are, the HOA.
We are paying for insurance.
It's not that simple.
It's what? I'm sorry.
It's not that simple. You maintain a latent defect that you know about, and someone injures themselves, that's one thing. If someone injures themselves through their own carelessness, that's another thing. And then there's some gray area in between those two poles.
Now, my quick remark was, as president, I'm pretty sure the association would be sued and somebody would have to sort that out.
Well, yeah, you'd be sued, for sure. That doesn't mean it'd be successful.
Yeah. I just wanted to respond and talk to you about, COVID has hit our community hard, just like it has every place else. We've done, I think, a pretty good job in limiting access to our club. Our clubhouse is still closed. Our gym has been, we've followed the guidances. We went through the entire summer managing the swimming pool with the correct regulations and the safety measures in place. We don't have a daytime, full-time manager to manage a pool. The things that we have a lifeguard there to handle that. We rely upon people seeing things in the community and reporting things to the management company, which is off-site. So we don't really have in my opinion, a viable way to supervise that pier with rules and regulations on top of it. There's just nobody there to do that. People will send me an email. The pier's all crowded with people, and they send me a photograph. And at this point, there's really, with the absence of rules, our impression that it was open to Queen Anne's County residents, there was really nothing we could do. And people say, well, I can't get on the pier, I can't take my kid down there, yada, yada, yada. So establishing rules, to me, means that we have to establish a way to enforce those rules also. And my question is, who's going to do that? And what's the procedures for doing that? If it's within the community, I think the HOA can handle it. If it's outside the community, we're going to need help.
I think these are very legitimate questions and need to be explored. I think it's important, as much as I think I'm the only one in this room who was here when this project was approved. And I'm repeating myself a little bit. It was highly controversial. It became a community such as you now see by the absolute skin of its teeth. I believe the growth allocation ordinance was approved 3-2. The pier, even though I can't specifically remember its being discussed, even Mr. Bilbao has said he remembers it was part of the negotiation. I don't know if we would be having this argument if the pier was not there, because there may not have been growth allocation approval, in which case there wouldn't be one house there, never mind 260. I understand that the manner in which the community was approved, which appears to have included public access to the pier, one way or the other, while it is not just part of history, it is part of why that community is there to begin with. And I don't think we can completely ignore that and say, well, we've changed our minds. But that's up to the commissioners ultimately. The county commissioners may say, well, that is interesting history, but it doesn't apply today. I wonder if there isn't a better approach through rules, figuring out how they're going to be enforced. Maybe the signs have to be in Spanish. I understand that that's partly going on here. And English. And maybe something can be accomplished that suits everyone.
what is the possibility of county funding for, I mean, if this is going to be a public access area, is this something that comes before the commission or goes to the commissioners? As far as if it's going to fall as a burden to a community, not just Gibson's, but any community. I don't know what we do in other communities where this might be the similar type situation. But is there county funding to put up fencing?
That seems to me something that might be discussed.
I mean, instead of putting the burden on the homeowners, clarifying perhaps some immunity relative to people that are not residents that come down and use the critical areas, which I have actually witnessed on several occasions, regardless of periodic visits. They've dug into the hillside, eroding that. They put a swing up on the tree branches and take their kids down. And they walk along there. I've walked along the area picking up beer bottles. It's just the dynamics that occurs, and it's in the critical area. So I pointed out as to, it doesn't have to be just Gibson's. I posed a question relative to any of these areas. Is this something that Queen Anne's County has taken on the responsibility? If it's going to be a public access, it would seem that it should be a county-wide responsibility to maintain and take care of these areas, or it has to make the other decision that if they're going to permit the invitation of the public onto these properties, that they give some sort of immunity to the community against the inappropriate use of the facilities. Let's say that someone comes into the area that's a public gathering area and they have a fight. Whose responsibility does that fall to? We have no enforcement in most of these communities in a generic sense to preclude that from occurring. What if that was to become an outcome of, well, who caught the biggest fish and whose fish was it, or whatever it might be? I point this out as a resident of the county as to what is the model, what have we done to set up some guidelines, be it Gibson's, which we're currently addressing, but any of the communities that have a similar type public access requirement in their guidelines.
There aren't any other. This is a one-off.
This is a one-off.
Because growth allocation was necessary. To get growth allocation, which is to permit those houses to be there today, the developer made certain concessions to get the politicians to agree to the growth allocation request.
Then I'll change my question about generic and I'll just say specific then to Gibson.
Can I just respond to a couple points that several of you have made? Ms. DeWiz, sorry. I just want to point out that our petition started well before COVID. So this is not in a reaction to COVID. And we had, as Jack mentioned, we had a lot more problems before COVID because people are just more cautious now. So I also wanted to mention that one of the ways, evidently, that this pier has become quite famous is evidently the fishing is quite good, and it has been mentioned on fishing websites on social media. To address Mr. Drummond, I would argue once again, what we are seeing at this pier were unforeseen circumstances when the developer agreed to make this a public pier. Surely it sounded like a wonderful idea at the time, but it just wasn't done right. We don't have parking. We don't have a toilet facility. We don't have a way for the community to restrict public from getting on there at all times of the day. And I also have to point out, and this is well spelled out in the petition, when I looked at the declaration and I studied the plats, etc., they have this easement for a waterfront park area. Well, it is not defined anywhere in any of the paperwork. I don't know what it means. I am making the assumption it means that pavilion and padded area, but we really don't know. So I would ask you to at least consider, at a minimum, could we get rid of that easement, because we don't even know what it applies to.
Another suggestion, another area of inquiry and negotiation may be, what about a public waterfront access on Macomb Creek within the 55-acre conservation area? If you want one thing, maybe you have to do something else.
I do address that in the petition. We would argue that there is an amazing amount of waterfront access in the 55-acre area.
The ponds,
if you
not the
consider a
ponds.
pond.
We're actually making.
But, I mean, waterfront access is not also defined as far as I know. So it doesn't say it has to be the Chester River. And also, the 55-acre area gives access to Macomb Creek, and there's a kayak launch there.
Not a pier, though.
It is not a pier. The covenants do not require a pier for passive recreation for public use.
Okay, well, that's a suggestion I'm making. If you want one thing, maybe you got to give up something else.
I'm just pointing out that in the ordinance and in the definition of passive recreation, it doesn't require a pier.
Okay.
I guess that's sort of non-negotiable then.
No, I'm not saying that we wouldn't, if you all think that, but you're building a pier, it's money. I mean,
Another pier to maintain.
right, another pier to take care of. You know, so I would suggest that, and I beg you to come over and look at it, go see for yourself. There is plenty of access to all of those ponds. People fish down there. They successfully fish without a pier. But if you would grant us the permission to terminate this easement on the other pier, we certainly are not going to say, no way, we're not even going to consider it. If you think that's really important and that's a perfect compromise.
So before we bring in our Director of Parks and Rec to ask a couple questions, which we may not even do. I'm sorry, did I mess your title up?
You got a promotion.
Yeah. Pay that young lady. Sorry. Would you be willing to work with staff to maybe to create some rules? I mean, now I'm committing Ms. Moordock's staff to maybe help facilitate some things. You know, I'm willing to work with you. We can do some, you know, I believe anybody, with the exception maybe Mr. Ebersberger, who's, you know, you know, to maybe try and work through something of creating some rules and maybe see how that works to minimize the activities that you state are happening, the alleged activities, versus trying to go to the commissioners and then having it removed. I'm just asking if that's something that you and your homeowners association are willing to try and exhaust first.
Well, I'd have to talk to the board. I'd have to talk to board members to get a discussion of that. We have talked about increasing, we have trails throughout the 55 acres that were built by Envirotech and Judy Wink through CBEC. She has talked to me recently about increasing adding a trail through the 55 that goes over to the Macomb Creek area and create a station there for bird watching to add a passive activity which would be open to the public. So we're agreeable to doing some things to enhance that 55 acres to have better, you know, community access. And there's some more parking available along Macomb Creek Road to do something like that. So we're open to something like that. I myself am not convinced of two things. One, I'm not convinced that I don't know the situation with other county parks where do you have entranceways where access is regulated going into parks? I don't know. If you do, then, you know, I can see controlling it and controlling the hours and controlling having people there as guards or rec employees. We don't have that. And so my big concern is with rules, is enforcement of rules.
So we do have, well, now I'm going to strip over title, someone here from Parks and Rec to answer that question. Okay. So if I may respectfully request that one of the two of you disinfect your area so that Ms. Nancy can come up and address that
Sure.
question.
I would just have to say one thing. I'll let you stay. You've done all the hard work, okay? I just have to say that on behalf of the board from Gibson's Grant, we do feel and think that we're smart enough to understand what perpetual means, and we read the documents, we understand that. But we also understand that the county struck a deal, made an agreement with the developer, and the developer gave up things in order to have it built, and we're there because of that, okay? Now the developer's leaving at the end of this year. We've assumed all responsibility, and we're left with the responsibility and the financial burden of running a county park solely on community contributions. And we're either requesting some help with that, or give us the pier, and that's a small piece of the big 55 acres that we think is a fair agreement. Keep the 55 acres, we'll work with you to have a passive park, but help us out with the overcrowding of the pier and the destruction of the shoreline. That's very important to us. We have an environmental committee, and we're going out there Saturday to move rocks around. We're paying Envirotech $16,000 to restore the shoreline, which has been damaged because of people walking the shoreline. We've trained our community, they don't walk on the shoreline. We even do work parties of only 3 people, because we don't want to create damage on the grasses. But to continue the way we're going, I'm concerned about the enforcement issues, and I think, honestly, fellow Queen Anne's County residents, we got the short end of the stick in the community. So, thank you.
So one quick question before you jump out. How many total units do you have?
I'm sorry?
How many total units are in Gibson?
It's my understanding we built out at 280, and right now, I think last time I talked to Mr. Burball, he had 12 to go.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And also, I did want to mention, and
You disinfect, Jack, can you wipe down the area for us,
yeah,
please?
sure.
Thank you.
remove your germs, please. Remove your germs, please.
Doing this now.
I did have a very good conversation with Nancy from Parks and Rec about, and they were very kind to offer us ideas as to how we can enforce some rules and regs on the pier. So we are more than willing, but we would like to, still would like to have those rules and regs apply to community members only.
Good morning. Nancy Scazzari with Department of Parks and Rec, Chief Environmental Resource and Parks Planner. Director Steve Shanley.
Sorry.
We've been in conversations about this, as we have on our own parks for many years, but so amplified this year due to COVID, as you know. Kind of not sure where to start. There's so many different aspects of this that I'd like to talk to you about, but I was here also with Chris, and a little bit of history is just prior to the approval of the Gibson's Grant community, the county used to have a 5% mandatory parkland dedication ordinance. We found that not to really be useful. We were getting pieces all over the place that were wetlands and wet forest areas that, really couldn't be used for recreation. At that time, we were also advocating for a Parks and Recreation impact fee that came around 2006 or so. That's just a bit of history to know that we've always looked for recreational areas within our communities. And I guess speaking more broadly, when we look at parks and open space and preservation areas and prepare our land preservation park and recreation plan to the state, we have to categorize these lands into larger open space tracts, regional parks, community parks, and neighborhood parks. So I remember, like Chris, I don't remember the details, but I do remember specifically meeting with Mike Birnbaugh and John Wilson and discussing these public areas. And aside from the growth allocation, they were willing to offer up this area for public recreation. So that said, a little bit more history. The White's Heritage Lane that runs along the east side of Macomb Creek there, within the red area, So that was to be access to the 55 acres. And there originally was no gate at the intersection of the Cross Island Trail. Some years later, a gate was installed. Several years ago, I was approached by the developer and said, we have issues with people coming in there. And I said, well, it's a public, 55-acre public park. And we had always talked about kayak access into Macomb Creek at that point. I know the language with CBEC is more conservation, education driven, but nonetheless, it was trails, passive use, and kayak launch. So several years ago, they came to us and they said, we want to be able to lock a gate there. And we said, well, just like our public parks, we can't lock it off for public access. The gate, whenever I've been through there, the gate is closed. I've seen it locked. They did provide I would say it's about a 3-foot handicap, accessible entranceway that, with a little switchback to get in there if you're on a bike or on foot. That said, it does somewhat limit the public access and use of that area. The area has now, on the east side of that road, has expanded and become your kayak storage area for your residents. I don't see public, I don't know if you can speak to that, I haven't seen public launching kayaks from there. But I think it's also worthy to note that shortly, Kay Hovnanian will be deeding over a location just to the east of just to the west of Macomb Creek, right about there, and towards the Cross Island Trail, where they were, part of their agreement was to create a trailhead. So there'll be a trailhead with restrooms and parking right there, not where that arrow is, but a little bit closer to the trail, and where public can also, launch kayaks, obviously park. It's a short walk to that 55 acres. So that sort of gets to the gist of my memo that I sent you. And while this is a planning and zoning issue and, growth allocation enters into things, I just want to speak from a parks perspective, and believe me, we feel your pain and we recognize and appreciate what happens when there's an influx of people. And it's been mounting over the years. COVID certainly has amplified it, like I said before. We do not have any public parks with entrance monitored in any way. This summer, with the commissioners looking hard at this issue, we were tasked with providing that monitoring and limiting by capacity, which is the only way we can limit capacity into the majority of our parks, mainly due to the funding mechanism by which they were purchased. We cannot allow restrictions to residents only because they were purchased with public money. It's part of program open space, which is 0.5% of recordation tax gathered throughout the state, and then the state allocates it to local jurisdictions. So at great expense, we did monitor on like Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays at Ferry Point Nature Park, Terrapin Nature Park, and Mattapique Public Clubhouse and Beach. Mattapique being our only state-approved public bathing beach, by the way. It was great expense, it was great difficulty, and enforcement is just so difficult. We have signage in multiple languages. We had staff and public security that we hired on weekends to assist our staff. We had people counting heads when one person left, another person could go in, etc. Still, enforcement was huge. And our nature parks, Terrapin and Ferry Point, were never intended for coolers, tents, fishing, that type of thing. So that's become a monumental issue. And our department is sitting down this winter, along with the commissioners, and devising a plan. That isn't going to work, just monitoring weekends. What we saw was come Monday, everybody was out there again. It was a free-for-all. So it's enforcement is a huge issue, and I guess, you know, the last sentence of my memo really brings it home. To me, it doesn't matter what the easement says, what's on paper, what's shown graphically. We've learned people don't abide by signage. It really needs to be an active in-person enforcement, and you know, we haven't figured out yet how we're doing it. I guess my question is to the HOA is, how do you plan on enforcing it? I mean, you can, if the easement were to be terminated, the enforcement is the issue, as you know, Chris mentioned the same. So don't understand how that would happen. And, you know, again, the bigger concern is this chipping away, you know, closing the gate. If this easement were to be terminated and everybody's directed to that 55 acres, we've got a trailhead opening up right down the road. At what point does that 55 acres become inundated capacity-wise, and you're back before us looking for that to be extinguished somehow? So those are the concerns of the Parks Department.
So, Ms. Casari, what I've heard was that currently in the condition we're in now, or the situation we're in now, that there is support for enforcement to the community for that pier because it is designated as public space and an environmental protection area. Is that correct? Or critical area?
I don't think I said that. I'm not saying that the parks can monitor that or enforce that in any way. We simply don't have the ability to do it even in our own parks, let alone on private for public use land.
So if we get rules posted, then it will, and they're not following the rules, then that would become a sheriff's department issue for enforcement.
It's the same situation we're in. We have we work closely with the sheriff's department. We've taken their advice on how to word the signage, and what they have told us is, you know, no trespassing signs, state an amount of fine that could then be, you know, someone could be cited and that could be enforced. Without that ability, they can come down.
So establishing rules is definitely an option.
Yeah,
that could be enforceable.
That they could enforce, sure. And then, you know, I know we get it, you know, the social media is out there, and, you know, our parks that, like I said, our nature parks are being advertised as some of the state's best beaches, and people come like it's Ocean City. And we've seen great degradation to our, you know, the natural component of those parks, and have to be replanting grasses and all at the expense. As far as acquiring that property, I can't speak without, you know, discussing that with my department, but I can tell you how program open space works, and there's an acquisition component and then there's a development component. Queen Anne's County is fortunate enough that we have, over the years, been able to preserve and acquire and preserve so much land, whether it be through ag preservation programs or open space programs for parks. Those numbers, there's a threshold that the county, that the state always put forth, and that was approximately 30 acres per 1,000 capita. They don't hold us to that number now because they understand with built facilities, indoor facilities, that sort of changes the game. But that was the number that a county would or jurisdiction would have to achieve in order to have that money that's allotted to them from program open space go from acquisition to them be able to use for development, bricks and mortar, you know, fields, what have you. So we don't always, it's not a guarantee that we're going to get program open space money. I remember about 6 years in a row we didn't get anything. Currently our pot is, it's dwindled a lot, but I think for acquisition it's like around 200,000, and that's over a series of years.
Right.
So I don't think we're in the position, and that's just my opinion, I don't think we're in the position to start, you know, picking up small pieces that we would then have to maintain, monitor, what have you, and add to our list.
Okay, thank you very much.
I did hear a nugget in there, though. The prohibition, that is to say, limiting the use of public publicly available lands or amenities to Queen Anne's County residents is prohibited if there's open space money involved. This public pier does not have open space money involved, and therefore it may be that it could be limited to Queen Anne's County residents as a rule, which needs to be explored.
Thank you. Are there
Can
any
I-
other? Yes, ma'am.
Therese, I just wanted to point out, when Nancy was talking about the gates that are on White's Heritage Lane, there are two gates. Only one is locked. The one that comes off of the Cross Island Trail, and of course the fire company has, it's a fire company lock. But anyway, the gate at the top it's just there. It's not locked. People can open it up. They can drive their cars down there. Part of the reason we were having problems with kayaks being stolen. So obviously it's a lot easier to come in off Piney Creek, grab a kayak and leave. So this way, if they're going to steal one, they've got to at least come up and go down through the community and then back through the community. It was just to try to, but it does not prevent public from going onto White Heritage or into the kayak area.
Okay. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions for the applicant or Ms. Garzosi?
I've got more of a comment, actually, Mr. Chairman, if I may, and that is partially to the environmental piece and Chesapeake Bay restoration efforts currently, and also to the financial burden that you have detailed thus far this morning. So the Chesapeake Bay program, right, the 6 states that are overseeing restoration efforts in the Bay, one of their key pillars is increasing access to the resource. We're not going to save it unless we get more and more people that enjoy it and cherish it the way those of us with means have a greater ease. To that end goal, Department of Natural Resources, state entity, and Chesapeake Bay Trust, quasi-state NGO, have programs for financial assistance for increasing, and this is going the wrong way in your approach, but I think you can sense the tenor of the room, of protecting and providing signage, protective measures, best management practices. You have suggested that you already have a contractor lined up. You have volunteers. Every single one of those things moves you higher up the ladder to achieve that funding opportunity. And I would suggest, as an HOA, you look into that because all of that can be used as match and leverage to get more money to maintain that facility. It will require you to leave it open to the public, again, with some of these carefully worded, perhaps creative signage, but you can get someone to pay for that. You can get them to pay for replacing rotten boards and putting up signs in multiple languages and barriers and shoreline erosion control measures. And to that point, and I'll finish with this, I don't doubt at all that pedestrian egress across those shorelines are compounding the erosion. But make no mistake about it, that 25-mile fetch that looks at Baltimore and sea level rise and increase in frequency and severity of storms is no doubt creating more of a problem than pedestrian access. So I take your point, but I also counter with, that's one small aspect of, I have to protect my waterfront and I don't ever walk on it. It's just the way waterfront ownership is. And so that I would suggest you look into, depending on the outcome of this conversation, look into those funding sources as a way to assist the community in leveraging their existing funds and getting additional projects and protective measures and practices on the waterfront, because the state has a diversity, inclusion, environmental justice push, and there are not enough applicants to spend that money down. So I think you would be a very competitive applicant, and I avail myself as a former Chesapeake Bay Trust employee. I'd happy to help you through that grant process and put you in contact with people there that will gladly assist you in strengthening your position and application to receive funding.
I'd just like to echo what Tom said, and we're here to assist homeowners and HOAs in those efforts, and actually the Department of Parks and Recreation and Public Landings has assisted a few at this point now, neighborhood HOAs and dredging, creating living shoreline areas, things like that. As Tom said, that erosion is only going to be exacerbated as we see, additional storms and higher intensity storms. So, we encourage you to look at erosion control measures, and we work with the county commissioners and finance departments, set up special tax districts that over time is paid by the HOA and things like that. So there's assistance out there.
Okay, so before we take, yes, ma'am.
Just had one more question directed to Mr. Drummond. I'm not sure because I don't know how growth allocation numbers work. But my question would be, do we even know whether the Pier and Waterfront Park area, which again was not defined in any documents that I could find, was even considered as part of the growth allocation numbers?
It's not a number.
Yeah, I don't know how.
Growth allocation changed the classification of the critical area portion of the property from, I don't remember if it was RCA or LDA, but at any rate, it went from either one of those classifications to IDA, intense development. Without that designation, critical area designation, the density of that project would have been significantly less than it, well, if it was RCA, it would have been one house per 20 acres. If it was IDA, was it IDA or?
It was 60 acres went from resource conservation to enhanced development area, okay. And 11 acres went from limited development area to enhanced development area.
So the 60 acres would have supported 3 houses without growth allocation. Instead, the 60 acres is over 200 houses, approximately. I don't know exactly, but you get my point.
Yeah.
And piers are affiliated with the land use there. So that pier that was called out is a part of that land use that was a part of that application.
I would just point out from my research that the pier, as far as I know, was never mentioned in any of the talking about that conservation area and the growth allocation. I would, ask the Planning Commission to look at that. Okay. But all the Planning Commission meetings that I read in the minutes never, ever mentioned the pier or the Waterfront Park area. It was all about the 55-acre conservation area.
Understood. Thank you.
I don't know if you have something
So if there's no other questions of the applicant or Nancy, we will entertain public comment.
And we have somebody waiting on Zoom. Yes.
John, do we have people outside?
We have nobody outside.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, so we're waiting on Zoom. Judy, can you unmute yourself? And you have 3 minutes.
I'm a Gibson's Grant homeowner.
Can you identify yourself, please? Your name?
Judy Klubo Stacy, and I lived in Gibson's Grant for about a year and a half. And I have seen the destruction at the pier. I know it's been close, well, I don't know, about a year ago, I guess. The community, they put out chairs and fishing poles and tried to really fix the pier up. And what has happened, all of that has been destroyed. The fishing poles are gone, the bikes were destroyed, they replaced the bikes. Some of the lights were broken, those have been replaced. Everything that was broken has been repaired. So I've seen the destruction from public people coming in, and you can put up signs, like we've been discussing, but who reads signs? The people that come in don't really pay any attention. That doesn't apply to them. So therefore, they just come in and do whatever they want to do. And the shoreline, that has always been a big issue. There is, the grass is completely destroyed and flattened. And I hate to see a beautiful community like Gibson's Grant being destroyed. And, the environmental issue is a big thing on this entire island. And the environment is being destroyed. The shoreline, number one. The other thing is just the beauty of it. And my other concern too is the 55-acre conservation area. If people start using that, then we have the same problem there. So where does it end? It just goes on and on. And eventually the community will not be a desirable place for people to want to buy and sell. It'll just be kind of a destruction area with all of the environmental issues coming to forefront and being destroyed. So that's pretty much all I have to say. My main concern is the environment, and if people start using the 55 acres, then that will become a big issue too. Trash and everything that they've done to the pier will happen in that area. So how do we stop this entire process from being destroyed? And the pier is only one part of it. The 55 acres becomes another issue. If funding could pay for the 55 acres, then that would help. But the pier, in order for people to get there, they actually have to drive through the entire community to get there. And I see people speeding through. I mean, everybody that lives here knows that the speed limit is 20. However, people speeding through don't pay any attention to the signs, just like they pay attention to nothing that that has signage attached. So that's pretty much all I need to say, all I want to say. So I will sign out.
Thank you, Ms. Stacy. We appreciate your comments. Are there any other public comment?
Yes, we have an email and we have a voicemail, both concerning Gibson's Grant. So first up, the email. It's comments in opposition of the petition to terminate easement at Gibson's Grant, Queen Anne's County Planning Commission meeting November 12th. A county in which development does not impair the quality of life enjoyed by all, a community that protects the expectations and opportunities of all its citizens. That's from the overall Community Vision, Queen Anne's County 2010 Comprehensive Plan. As a general principle, the public has a right to access and enjoy our public resources, including our rivers. According to the key vision quoted above from the 2010 Queen Anne's County Comprehensive Plan, Queen Anne's County is aligned with this principle. We understand that access to our rivers and nature is a right that should be afforded to all citizens. We understand that access to our rivers and nature are less available to underprivileged community members. We understand that access to our rivers and nature promote equitable opportunity for recreation, equitable opportunity for harvesting, and equitable public health benefits. We understand that public spaces throughout our region are facing increasing pressures due to the COVID-19 pandemic and associated restrictions on outdoor or indoor activities. We believe that the response to increasing pressure on our public access points cannot and should not be to reduce public access points. We believe public access to our public waterways and nature should be increased to meet the increasing demands, and Shore Rivers pledges to support any such efforts. We strongly encourage the Planning Commission and the Commissioners to help us achieve the vision for a county in which development does not impair the quality of life enjoyed by all, a community that protects the expectations and opportunities of all its citizens, and deny the petition to terminate the easement at Gibson's Grant. Thank you for the opportunity to submit comments opposed to the proposed project. Please contact me should you have any questions regarding your position. Regards, Tim Trombauer, Chester Riverkeeper. And our voicemail. Turn the speakers up here. Great. This voicemail is from Curtis Hall. Sorry for the sound.
You could do voicemail.
He submitted written.
Yeah, I thought he did too.
I recognize that name.
Yes, my name is Curtis Hall. Message is for the commissioners. There is on the hearing agenda tonight an issue at Gibson Grant regarding public easement for the dock area. as a resident of Gibson Grant and the Homeowners Association, I'm concerned about liability. If there were to be any type of injury off the dock or around the facilities without adequate parking and lighting, how that could affect the community of Gibson Grant from a liability standpoint. I would urge to remove the public easement and turn it back to the community who already pays to maintain the facilities. Thank you for listening to my comment. Again, Curtis Hall.
And that's all I've got.
Thank you. So hearing no other public comment from Zoom, Mr. Shelton, you've confirmed there's no public comment in the outside chambers. Public comment is now closed. So I think before us today, fellow commission members, is a favorable or unfavorable vote and recommendation to the county commissioners. I don't anticipate, from based off testimony that I've heard today, although Ms. Hirsch and the HOA in Gibson's Grant is willing to maybe explore opportunities, they'd like to proceed forward with the motion brought forth before the Planning Commission. So, is that correct?
That's correct, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So at this time, I'll open it up for any discussion for the Planning Commission. Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Chair, I have concerns about placing the enforcement piece of this on the Homeowners Association or residents of Gibson's Grant. As Ms. Scozzari presented, this has been a challenge for our county-funded Department of Parks and Recreation, and I've seen it. I was actually at the Heritage Center on a number of occasions for meetings over the summer, and I saw the staff out there in 95-degree heat, trying very politely and professionally, to explain the rules to people. And there was, there were backlogs created of people looking for the one out and one in, and you've got a family of four, and they can get one in, and some misunderstandings, miscommunications, language barriers, and these are all problems that a trained county government entity is dealing with. Whether or not alcohol use is permitted at our public parks or at Gibson's Grant, alcohol is being used, and I'm just afraid of confrontations or community residents who are not trained in enforcement policies. I'm also afraid of, with untrained people, over-enforcing as well. So I have a really big concern of making Gibson's Grant create a set of rules and signage and so forth, and then foisting the enforcement upon the community and the residents in that community who, unless there are a lot of law enforcement people in your community that are not trained to do this. That's my concern.
And I think those are valid concerns, Ms. Diotis, and I share them with you. However, I think that if they establish a set of rules, that provides them maybe some legal guidance to call the sheriff to say, these are our rules, even though it is a public access pier, and they have that opportunity to show the rules, and then the sheriff can say, listen, you're not allowed to have alcohol. That's a citation. You're in public alcohol drinking. As Mr. Lay pointed out, there's grant funding available to do signs if they enter critical areas, and they are able to assess a fine. They can put a fine. If you enter this area, you can charge $250 and a ticket. So those are some of the things I gathered from the testimony today that allows an opportunity for enforcement, however, keeps the resources that we have available. And that's just my opinion.
May I, Mr. Chair, add on to that, the enforcement piece, right? Again, counselor, step in if I overstep my knowledge base, but the sheriff's jurisdiction ends at the shoreline, and
But that would extend to anything attached to the shoreline.
Okay, but I'm offering up another enforcement opportunity. In the State Department of Natural Resources has Marine Police that very often, periodically, visit county parks, waterfront boat ramps, accesses like that. If there are concerns, some of the testimony was keeping undersized fish, things like that. That would be another opportunity if your residents are concerned about confrontational. There's just another opportunity for assistance with enforcement through DNR, Natural Resource Police.
Let me make a comment on that. The problem I have here is I'm seeing it's public access, I understand, but when you got a do not enter sign, it's no longer public access. So we cannot enforce that.
Right, well, I don't think there's not a do not enter sign. They would establish rules that would say sun up to sundown or 7 a.m. to 5
The sign that they showed, there's a do not enter sign for the beach there.
That's for the environmentally protected area.
That's an environmentally protected area?
Okay.
So
but
they can have that.
That would limit the amount of destruction that's going there. It's at least a step in the right way.
And we do.
Signage to me
have
is
those
useless if you don't have enforcement behind it. Print up 50 signs. If you can't enforce it, you just wasted your time.
Agreed.
So we need enforcement somehow and I don't know, maybe the county could work with this somehow, but there has to be enforcement on it. I feel their plight there that if they can't enforce this. It's a resource we need to protect.
If I may inject again, Mr. Chair, the issue that I think still presents itself is there is no parking, adequate parking by any means for any public use, which other parks they have that. There's no public restroom facilities, in this area, which requires people to, use the surrounding natural environment. And so I don't think, as you try and get your arms around this, this is, as Chris has pointed out, this is a one-off. This is a much more thorny issue than just saying, okay, this is public access to the water, because public access to water would typically have public restrooms, adequate parking, opportunity for those things to occur. I know that the front ponds where the people park, because there's a restriction on parking along the entrance road to Gibson's Grant, they go over to the Sitka or the Exxon station and use their parking lot and then walk over to Gibson Grant. They don't park, on the property. This is a one-off situation, and I think presents, as has been discussed, pretty thorny situation here. But we can use all these other resources, but we're not going to solve no public restrooms, and we're not going to solve the adequacy of parking. It just doesn't happen. So I don't know that permitting this to continue as it is, the problem's only going to get worse and become thornier as the community is finished being built out. So I have a challenge with that.
I will say again, it strikes me as somewhat, I'll use the word obstinate, to not indicate a willingness to explore an alternative within the 55 acres on the waterfront or some sort of, I don't know if you call it a pier, you call it a landing, you can call it something, that is the replacement for that which you wish to make private.
Thank you, Mr. Drummond. So I guess, is there any other comments from the commission? Hearing none. We shall entertain a motion for a favorable recommendation to the county commissioners to terminate the Pier and Waterfront Park as noted in the folios and levers. I won't read them. I think, Sharon, you have them correct? Yes. So I'll entertain a motion.
Mr. Chair, I'll make a recommendation that the Planning Commission send a recommendation to the county commissioners in support of denying the petition to terminate the easement, citing inconsistency with the intent of the 06 Gibson's Grant subdivision approval and the affiliated growth allocation conditions.
So, Mr. Commissioner Lee, if I heard you correctly, you have made a motion to deny the termination easement request.
That's correct.
Do I have a second?
I'll second it.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye. Aye. All opposed?
No.
And I have to abstain. I mean, I live there. I can't, in good conscience sit here and vote on that.
Right. So I'm going to re-vote just so that I can make sure there was some overrun in conversation. Those all in favor of Mr. Lee's motion and the second by Mr. Jackson, say aye. Aye. Those opposed?
No.
So Sharon, that is Commissioner Diotis and Commissioner Baker opposed, with 3 in favor of. Therefore, the motion passes to send a negative recommendation to the Queen Anne County Commissioners for removal of the easement and piers. So thank you very much. This time, do we want to take a break? 5-minute break? Okay. So we are going to take a 7-minute break and we will reconvene at 11. Back to the Queen Anne County Planning Commission meeting, November 12th, 2020. Call the meeting back to order. Next item on the agenda is minor site plan SP 20-07-0062, Big Truck Y Farm Brewery, 148 Cooper Farm Lane, Queenstown, Maryland. Mr. Tarleton?
Hi, yeah, Brendan Tarleton, Senior Planner with the Department of Planning and Zoning for the record. Here before you is a minor site plan for Big Truck Y Farm Brewery. Property location is tax map 59, parcel 10, located on the eastbound side of Route 50 off of what is known as Cooper Farm Lane. The applicant's proposal is to construct a 4,900 square foot production building as well as a 4,752 square foot tasting building to include customer area and storage. They're here before you asking for minor site plan approval. The application is in front of you as a minor site plan because of its location in proximity to Route 50. Moving forward here, we can see the outlined area of the parcel located on the southern side of Route 50 on the eastbound. It's approximately 270 acres. The entirety of the property is zoned agricultural. Oh, sorry about that. A portion of that property does lie within the critical area RCA designation, approximately 34.985 acres. As noted in your staff report, none of this critical area portion is proposed to be developed as part of this plan. Rather, the majority of the development will take place towards the northern portion of the parcel located closest to 50. Here we can just see the overall general wetlands map that we have here in the county. The applicant did provide on sheet V101 of the site plan you received an area where they did conduct wetlands delineation and received Army Corps and MDE written concurrence with regards to some of the wetlands within the development area. The portion to the south of the first wooded area you see off of Cooper Farm Lane onward into the property was not investigated for wetlands because that's not an area intended for development at this time. The area is located, you can kind of see here, not really, in the shaded green hatched area is the sensitive species review area that we require for projects. So we asked applicants to contact the Department of Wildlife and Heritage with DNR to further investigate these areas or look through their maps to see if there's any historic prevalence of any type of species that would need additional protection. They did identify areas of Delmarva fox squirrel habitat and suggested FID species habitat. No woodlands is proposed to be cleared or impacted as part of this plan. Therefore, there isn't additional measurements or requirements needed for the protection of these areas. Here we can see kind of an overall master plan, if you will, of the proposed development. I provided the master key plan that the applicant provided with these plans as well. We can kind of just walk through this a little bit here. You see A labeled down toward the southern portion of the picture you're looking at is actually the tasting room facility building, and B is located directly adjacent to it. That is the production room facility, and the site areas labeled as E would be the proposed patio areas for outdoor seating, which the applicant states in their narrative will be used during times when weather permits. The area shown as D would be the area for vehicle turnaround for loading and offloading of materials, agricultural equipment coming to drop off hops as they're harvested as well, I guess the applicant has stated. And the Area C is actually the proposed, there's 21 parking spaces in Area C. The projects require 24 spaces. The additional 3 that you see are located actually to the eastern side of what is the D, the loading area, with the appropriate width drive aisle for access to those spaces. The applicant intends to use those for their employees to park as well, away from the separated area where possible people may come to the facility. And then you can see there from the entrance feature, they're planning on widening the area of Cooper Farm Lane to go ahead and have a roundabout entrance style for the facility for individuals to come up and park. To the south of the actual facility in the loading area, you can see just kind of a concept of the applicant's proposed landscaping for this facility. Because it's in the ag zoning district, it does not have any additional buffering requirements from ag zone properties. On the first map, you saw the surrounding areas of the facility are ag zoned as well, so there's no additional landscape buffers on those sides. The applicants provided these landscape buffers as they've seen appropriate to help buffer the overall building schematics from the actual roadway of Route 50 and upon request of planning and zoning staff as well. I failed to mention the Area F is where they're actually proposing to have their hops or their agricultural area for harvest for the actual brewery itself.
Which area was that? Can you go back?
Area F, you can see shaded there right along Route 50. They're offering that as their area for hop growing and cultivation right on the side of 50, which would further enhance that buffer from the roadway. The Route 50 corridor area requires a 100-foot buffer from the road. You can kind of see that BRL dotted right on the outside of that hatch pattern for the hops areas to be grown as well. So you can see the buildings are set back in even further than that required 100-foot BRL from Route 50.
I'm sorry, Brandon, before you go on.
Yeah.
Is there a reason that buffer, the F, doesn't extend all the way to the entrance to the site?
I don't know. I don't know if the applicant has a proposed.
It's not a buffer.
It's not a buffer. It's the area to be grown in hops. So I don't know if they're just keeping the rest of it in agricultural production. I guess it would be on how much they plan to harvest or how much
That's your billboard, if you will.
Yeah, that's the hops. They're 18.
And they're tall, right? They're on big poles and things. Okay.
18 feet tall.
Thanks for the clarity.
Yeah, looks like the slope is all along too.
Moving on, here's just more of a technical design view of the actual site plan itself. For reference, you can see some of the topography here as well as the proposed SRA to be located on the inner side of the actual entrance. As we move further through this, you can see the proposed stormwater design. The applicants proposed dry wells and provided soil borings to the Department of Public Works. They're satisfied with the proposed stormwater plan that's been provided. The soil borings, they said, were adequate to accommodate the proposed stormwater facilities for this. So there's no additional concerns there. I've attached the most recent staff memo that was provided to the applicant prior to this meeting that also includes that correspondence for your reference. This is a detailed view of the actual landscape plan that was depicted on the color rendering. Just for your reference, if you wanted to go back or see any of the plant materials here, I just wanted to provide this in case there was any technical questions as far as the actual buffering goes for the site. And here we can see the applicants proposing to address forest conservation with the nearest area of forest contained to the site. So that southerly portion of the forested area that contained a portion of non-tidal wetlands closest to the site will be protected in perpetuity with approximately 4.33 acres of forest conservation being proposed as part of the plan. That forest conservation would need to be executed prior to receiving final signatures of the site plan as well. Staff's reviewed that forest conservation plan and is satisfied with the plans provided and the easement documents that have been provided as well. Because the property is located along Route 50, an access permit is required from State Highway. Additional evaluation of the area, I believe they concluded that it would necessitate an XL and decel lane. Here's a concept plan that the applicants provided for what that XL and decel lane and entrance feature would look like. They're currently in the phases of actually designing this actual concept layout with SHA. Their comments are included in great detail at the end of the attached comment letter from staff, just to provide you an example that the applicant is actively working to obtain the approvals from State Highway necessary to provide adequate access for this site. In the heritage letter noted, also in the staff comments, there's several historic sites located around this area, both in the Maryland Historic Registry and the National Historic Registry, kind of surrounding this general area. Just to kind of walk you through some of those, because we don't necessarily have a whole lot of projects that come in with relevant historic areas surrounding them. Here is the closest one to the actual site. I'm sure most people are familiar with this just traveling across Route 50, is the St. Peter's Church, which is on the National Historic Register. This is located about 5 feet off of Route 50. To be very honest with you, it's very close to the road, and that's a pretty predominant feature there, fully brick-built structure. And then just to the east of this site, going further down Route 50 into the county, there's the Rhodes Farm as well. The house is noted as well as several ag structures. The barns were in relative disrepair, and these are actually newer barn facilities that were constructed on the property for the working operation there. So these are similar pole building style to what the applicant's proposing. Obviously, these are red to fit what the original buildings were on the site. And here we have Bloomingdale, which is located just to the north on Route 50 of this site. And this is on the National Historic Register as well. This is a very prominent, brick-built mansion. No longer accessed directly off 50, but it used to have a direct access from 50. That's a poplar lined lane. You can actually still see that today, but it's no longer approved for actual access. And then this is the Potter House, which is located adjacent to the Bloomingdale house as well. And this is under the Maryland Inventory of Historic Properties. Here is the architectural renderings that the applicants provided for you for their buildings. You can see here we have on the left side of the screen is the production facility, and on the right side you have the tasting room. This would be the front view from the actual parking area where the patrons would drive up, where those 21 spaces would be. And then they have obviously just a rendered, generic entrance to the buildings right up front. And this would be the rear of the building, so this would be the side that would be fronting more so the people traveling westbound on 50 as you come up around where the church is. This is the view of the buildings that you would see traveling that way. Obviously, the landscaping buffering is not shown in this picture, but this is just for reference so you could see the buildings as well. And then this is the proposed signage. I believe this is the signage for your existing facility that you have up near Baltimore, if I'm correct. So those were just provided as an example, just for signage detail for what the applicant proposes. I think their application, and I called out in the staff report notes, 2 freestanding signs are permitted as part of this operation. I offered the correction in my staff report that actually only 1 freestanding sign would be allowed for commercial use in the ag district, or not a commercial, but rather a non-residential. So. And that's really all I have for you. So if there's any of these slides you'd like me to turn back to as we go through this, feel free. But I'll leave the narrative that the applicants provide to stand on its own, and they can further describe their scope of business to you. And if you have any further questions, I'll move back and allow them to step up and speak. Yeah, the colored one. Yeah. And I'll leave this up here. If you want to click through any of this while you're up here, feel free to.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning, Mr. Stevens.
Mr. Stevens, on behalf of the applicant, I have Barry Griffith with me, as well as Mr. Kim Fuchs, who will remain seated back there, and I'll take my distance here and thank Brennan very much for the detailed and accurate staff report. You've had a long morning, so I don't know that I need to say a whole lot right now. Barry will give you an overview. We'll answer some more questions. Mr. Fuchs is here and can answer the operational questions you may have, and he'll tell you a little bit about the operation as well. He runs another one, as Brennan had said, in Baltimore County, and so we're excited that this will be a nice facility right here on a very large piece of property, very large farm. So, Barry?
Barry Griffith, Lane Engineering. We've been working with Mr. Fuchs and his team on this farm brewery proposal for quite some time. Mr. Tarleton did a great job overviewing the property for you, so I'll try not to be repetitive. But I'll try to add some additional information and then be available to answer any questions. So this is a working farm now with about 124 acres of woods and 146 acres of grain crops. It's going to continue to be a working farm, and the farm brewery is an addition to the farm that works towards county goals for agribusiness as well as agritourism. We did do preliminary traffic work to determine what the peak hour trips would be and whether this project would need to comply with county adequate public facilities ordinance requirements, and The study yielded that it did not. We presented to SHA the conceptual plans for the entrance, for a commercial entrance, which involved adding the A-cell and D-cell lanes. SHA submitted a letter in July with no objection to county approval. And as Brendan said, we're still now working on the technical engineering plans. So they're comfortable with what we're doing from a Route 50 perspective. We've looked at, how do you enter and exit this site? Essentially, it's a right in, right out eastbound, but there are safe ways to also leave the site and go westbound. There is a center turn lane if you were to leave the site about 600 feet east at St. Peter's Church, and then there's an additional center turn lane at Bloomingdale about 7/10 of a mile down if you're leaving the site and then ultimately trying to head westbound. If you're entering the site from westbound, you would actually go to the center turn at Greenspring and use that center turn and come back into the site. We have also addressed wastewater on this site, working closely with Mr. Nickerson's office. We have a septic system designed that will accommodate the use. We're also going to have a separate 10,000 gallon holding tank on this property that deals with the brewery waste. That does not go into the drain field. It's not handled as normal septic. And that can be disposed at a wastewater treatment plant, or with some proper permitting can actually be reapplied to the fields. But that's kept separate from the wastewater, the bathrooms within the facility. The tasting room is essentially a seating area for customers to come in and try the different beers. Half of that building is kind of storage. The other building, the production room, is pretty much all production and storage. And that area D that's outlined is sort of a large working area for, it's not a customer parking area or customer area at all. That's where employee vehicles would be, farm and brewery vehicles, unloading, offloading in that area. Areas E, which are on the left side of both buildings, those are just some outdoor sort of areas for customers on good weather days to be able to go sit, put up a lawn chair, whatever, have a beer. We're going to keep the primary circulation system here, mostly gravel, in keeping with the farm landscape that we're looking for. The only area we're really going to hard pave are the 21 customer parking spaces in front of the building. As far as buffering goes, as Mr. Talton said, we were asked and we agreed that we could do some buffering around the edge of this to screen better primarily from St. Peter's Church. So, they're going to be looking at into that end of the building and that service area. The hops field is also going to be there. That's about 2 acres of hops that are going to be grown. It's an important component of the beer making process. Most of the rest of this front field is going to still continue to be tilled. There will maybe be some lawn area within the loop, and that could also serve as an area where there could be some overflow parking in the event, there's a great day in the fall and more people show up than expected. We've got some room to accommodate some additional parking. Mr. Fuchs has recently been talking to his neighbor to the east, Mr. Rhodes, who adjoins us just on the east side of the property. Our building down to Mr. Rhodes' property line, which is the property line at the bottom on this drawing, behind the buildings, about 160 feet away. Mr. Rhodes actively farms that. He actively hunts that. He's asked Mr. Fuchs if he would consider putting up and growing a hedgerow between those two fields, Mr. Rhodes' field and Mr. Fuchs' field. And I think they're in agreement to do that. So what might be proposed is a sort of a 50-foot wide natural regeneration area, about 900 feet long from where it ultimately comes from that hops field back to the wood line. They would let it naturally regenerate and supplement with a seedling stock, similar to you would do for a forest conservation planting, mixed hardwoods, about 700 stems an acre. And ultimately, you'd have a nice hedgerow between those two properties and minimize any negative impacts one way or the other. I haven't talked a lot about production, the actual operation, but you know, what we're doing here is we're making beer with products grown on the farm. It's anticipated that the main business activity would consist of about 20 to 50 people on an average weekday, maybe 100 people stopping by on a weekend to try to sample and purchase the beers. Their prime time is 4 to 8 p.m., Thursday through Sunday. The average customer is in a facility like this for about an hour and a half to 2 hours and might consume 1 to 3 beers. So it's not a bar. It doesn't operate as a bar, doesn't act like a bar. It's a different entity altogether where people can come and see how the beer is made, where the ingredients are grown, and can sample the products. What else do I need to cover for you? We are proposing one freestanding sign, which is all that is allowed, and you saw a sample of that. We're going to have minimal site lighting, basically just lighting at the buildings for security reasons. And I think we've already talked about stormwater management. And so I think I've covered most everything, but if I've left anything off, please ask questions. I did take the time to look through Article 25 of the code, site plans, consideration by the commission. And I do find that, you know, the requirements for planning commission approval to me all seem to be met here in my professional opinion in terms of adequately addressing public health and safety concerns. And I think that this use, this farm use, and the idea of keeping this as a farming landscape, those buildings you saw, they are designed to look and be, and in some ways even function as modern farm buildings. High walled sides, gable roofs, shed roofs, large mass door openings, minimal windows. This is what a modern farm building looks like. And that's what Mr. Fuchs is trying to get here. And I think it is completely compatible with the landscape of the surrounding area.
Commissioners, I do have Mr. Fuchs here, and he can address functional and operational questions for you. If you recall, you asked me during the legislative review for legislation and farm breweries to present information to you about hops operation, and Mr. Fuchs put that together for you, so you had that and reviewed that. I don't think he'll go back into too much detail on that, but I would like to ask him to just say a couple of words, and then if you have questions for him, and you can stay right there. Is that okay, or you want him to move on?
He needs to be near a microphone,
Okay, all right,
please.
well, go ahead.
Hi, Kip Folks. I'm the owner of the Y Farm. It's great to be here again. We're now successfully operating our Baltimore facility. So previously we weren't, now we are. So we're 5 weekends into it, so I actually have a little bit more knowledge than I did before. But we are in our 6th year of growing hops. So I can speak a lot about the hops, and I can tell you a little bit about what's going on at the brewery. The hop field, like you had pointed out, it's a trellis system with airplane wire. It's about 20 feet tall. They grow from spring to fall. They get cut right around September 1st, and then they're dormant until the next spring. They can grow up to a foot a day in the summer, which is pretty cool. That field F will be completely green and will not be able to see through when they're full. It is thick, bushy, and is pretty interesting looking. And we tried to display that on the front of the farm. We think we could expand into other areas of the farm, and if you looked at your plat, you would see another 80 to 90 acre field further on the farm. What we're trying to learn if hops is the appropriate thing or to do grain. So we started with 2 acres of hops in intention of expanding when we see how the soils do with the hops there. We had unsuccessful types of hops that did not grow in Baltimore County. We put 7 in the ground, only 3 of them lived. So there's a little bit of a learning process as to which ones like these type of soils. The hops, we are the only brewery in Maryland that is using 100% of our hops in our beer. Our beer has been great, it's been well received. It is a premium product. It's a tasting room. We have families, people bike to our facilities. It's a really interesting, it is not a bar. We do not serve hard alcohol. We don't serve any other liquor. We're not allowed to. We have limited hours of operations. In Baltimore County, it is cleared out. When we're closed, it's dark. There's no lights. There's no parking lights. It is a working farm. So we're really pleased at Baltimore County. We think we can take those learnings to this Y farm. And we like the idea of having Big Truck Northern Baltimore and Big Truck on the Y. So we're really excited about it. The facilities that we did learn about is separating the brewing equipment and the hops processing. You have to pelletize, dry the hops, and you have to vacuum seal them and freeze them. And then you use them in the brewing process. We only have one building in Baltimore County, and we are on top of each other, and it is a lot of handling issues and a lot of public issues where they're in too much of the brewing part. So in this location, we have 2 separate facilities. That's the biggest learning that we've taken away from Baltimore County. I can answer really anything. I just wanted to give you a general overview. We're super excited. We think it is a family-oriented, we think it's a low impact, and we think it's going to look like an agricultural farm. I do think the hops will draw a ton of interest because it is a very different looking crop than what is used to on the Eastern Shore. The sandy soils we think are actually going to do better than Baltimore County, where we have a lot of clay and a lot of rock. So we're excited. And I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
I have 2 for you, please.
Sure.
One is clarification of the term I'm unfamiliar with regard to your hours of operation. You're referred to as shoulder season. Is that sort of the beginning and end of a season? I don't know what that term means.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that exact term means. I'm not sure where we wrote that out. Did we use that, Barry?
We did. We said, let me find it.
Was it about the tasting room or about the production?
I think it was talking about
Business hour operations as follows: 10 to 10 daily, shoulder season hours 4 to 8, majority business falling between Thursday, Sunday.
Yeah, so we did a study with the Brewers Association that generally speaking, most of the money spent in a tasting room is on a Thursday to a Sunday. Matter of fact, 80% of it is on a Friday and a Saturday. So it's not really advantageous to have staff Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, because you're not going to make any money. So currently in Baltimore County, we do not operate unless it's Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday. So I think it just means it shoulders the brunt of the profit on those time frames.
Peak attendance, if you will.
Correct.
Thank you.
And I think we would do the same here. We would not be open in those times where it didn't make sense to be open.
Mr. Lee, did you say you had 2 questions?
Oh, sorry, yes. Thank you, Mr. Stevens. The other that you mentioned, the separating the public area user space from your production facility. I know a lot of the draw, at least for myself personally speaking, is to sort of see, like you said, the interesting crops. And Mr. Griffith made a comment that most of the ag building layout, minimum windows. I'm curious as to how you'll address or engage the visitors in the production process if they're not allowed to see it or be. I understand they're not allowed in the room necessarily.
So if you take a look at E, those seating facilities, there'll be a glass garage door that they will be able to directly see the big stainless steel brewing equipment. Now, on occasion, we would open those doors in nice weather, and you can do some small tours to show people how you process it. Right. What we learned from a fire suppression and a safety standpoint, our boilers and our hot liquor tanks need to be separated from the public. And we line those around so people don't walk too close to. I mean, it's heavy machinery. It has a steam. It operates so we have temperatures that we're controlling the production of beer. Right now in our current facility, we wish we could have separated that a little bit more. But we think we can get that engagement through some cool glass doors that you can look right in there.
Yeah, I think that'll
And
be-
that's right on E and B.
Yes. All right, thank you. I think that'll be a big draw for the
Yeah.
public interest side of your business.
Yeah, we get a lot of questions to ask if people can walk the brewery.
So I noticed that you have 24 parking spaces with overflow up to 50 in one of the grassy areas. I'm presuming that's the center racetrack format that you have up there. What are your anticipated occupant loads for interior? I mean, outside is obviously different, but with only 24 parking spaces and looking at your layouts, it looks like the tasting room is pretty small, and then you have a lot of serving area in which is no longer tasting, and then it's service. You know,
Yeah, I think we had a 200 to 240 person occupancy in the building A. We did that for maximum occupancy. That is not the average occupancy. The average occupancy is probably less. So,
Well, you don't design to an average occupancy,
Yeah,
you design
so
to the
that-
maximum, which is part of your business model.
yeah, so that's what our building A is. I believe it's 239, Barry?
Well, the wastewater facility and the restrooms are designed for 240 max. The building is sized for that. The parking is based on the parking standard that the county asked us to use. And quite frankly, you know, we were not interested in developing a large amount of paved or gravel impervious area parking. So we think that given what we've understood, and Mr. Fuchs, as he stated, you know, he's learning how this goes. You know, we've got enough parking to handle the expected traffic. And if there are occasions where we have more visitors and guests, we do have overflow parking areas in grass.
Well, my concern is once you start parking on the grass, now you're environmentally dripping oils and other things into the environment. Typically, a parking space is, Brendan, you can correct me if I'm wrong, it's something that's paved and identified. And those stormwaters are captured and sent to a best stormwater management practice to be filtered or whatever else the case may be. Now, if you're going to put another 25 to 30 cars out in parking in the grass, that's still ag area technically, now you're running the potential for, you know, because I don't maintain my car properly, to put all kinds of additional
Yeah, this
things
was a
into the
bit of
environment.
a challenge that we discussed between us and with planning, because there's what Mr. Fuchs anticipates and what the code requires for parking, and then there's the potential for overflow. And what we've told Mr. Fuchs is, look, if you start using that overflow on any regular basis, you're going to have to amend the site plan, come back in, and deal with it then. But we don't know that he'd use it on any regular basis, or whether it just be an occasional type of use at this point in time. So, like he was saying, it's a bit of a learning curve. Do we build it now and potentially don't use it and have that gravel and pavement out there? Or do we see it, you know, meet the code requirements, have an area in case it gets used, and then if there's some type of regular use of that area, we're going to have to look at amending the site plan, coming back in, and, you know, doing it, stormwater, the whole 9 yards. That's kind of where we fell out, you know. And
It's definitely something we've talked about. We're open to feedback. The circle area would be the overflow. Yeah, so I think, you know, if it's gravel, it's obviously a lot cheaper and quicker. Paving gets quite expensive. We have, I think, only 30 paved spots in Baltimore County, and then we have gravel and grass.
it's not, it's, what do we do? Do we build it now, or do we wait and see what happens? And if we need to build it, come back in? That's the kind of where we are.
All the gray areas coming in off of Route 50 in through the circle, the G, if you will, that's all pervious?
That's gravel.
Or impervious? Oh, it's
Yeah.
Impervious.
impervious?
Gravel paved, both impervious.
And part of that is the farm structures, the farm lane, to give the farm experience, to not be highly commercial with lighting and paved and feeling more like a commercial restaurant, I would say. So there is a little bit of a look and feel that we've been trying to keep with, and that's also something we've played with in Baltimore County because they have different regulations and with stormwater management. So we do have some paved driveway in Baltimore County, but most of it is gravel too.
The only other thing I noticed, because we were out in the hallway for an hour or so, I know Mr. Rhodes is out there, so I didn't.
So are there any other questions of the applicant?
One, Queenstown has expressed interest in annexing properties to the opposite side, right? Is there expansion potential on the other side of 50, on this side, or is it solely?
Nowhere near this.
Got it.
Yeah, the only place they go across 50 is the Wheatlands Farm, and that's already in. Their comprehensive plans don't call for them to go across 50 anywhere else, except for Wheatlands. And then the little commercial that's next.
So most of the development that's planned potentially in the future is all to the north of 50?
It's at the Dudley Farm, and in
Yes.
fact, they annexed the Dudley Farm about 2 years ago.
Right.
And so now they have all that within the town boundary.
So one thing I'm going to ask Brent, Mr. Charlton to do is get with MDOT. I foresee a potential problem with the traffic lanes that they've laid out. It's right in and right out. However, to go back west, I believe it was Bloomingdale, that's the intersection. We don't want another 304 at that particular location. And once we start introducing alcohol and things of that nature, I see that as a potential problem. And I'm going to ask MDOT to take a look at that through Mr. Tarleton.
That's fine. We still have our access permit to get any recommendations they have or regulations they want to apply. We could certainly deal with that. We hope we can do that as part of that access permit.
Question, on the guidelines that you have in Baltimore County, are the Queen Anne's County, since this is new territory for us, are our guidelines as stringent or less stringent than what you're dealing with in
Their
Baltimore
site
County?
development and building codes are slightly different, but the guidelines are the same.
Thank you.
I like this stuff.
Thank you, guys.
If there's no other questions of the applicant, I guess we'll open up for public comment.
I'm Tommy Rhodes, live on Carmichael Road, but our family owns a farm adjacent to, it's the property line. You can see the black property line at the end of F there, goes down to, that's our field.
On the bottom of the map?
On the bottom of the map, east of it. It's an active farm. We've tilled the farm ourselves. We've actually owned the farm for over 130 years, our family has. And the only problem we had with it, the concept of the brewery's fine, we like that, but it was the buffer that we discussed, and we were fortunate enough, when we were waiting outside, we talked to everybody. What Mr. Griffith said, if that could be done, we'd be very fortunate, we'd be happy. Because right now, we don't have any plans for the field, but there might be some permitted uses that we could do down the road, maybe a winery to do that, or chicken houses, and if so, we would definitely entertain a larger buffer there to go with that. That's all I have to say.
Excuse me, Mr. Rose, with respect to that suggested/requested buffer, how that map is limiting in your property exposure, I was curious if you had any where that should be specifically?
As Mr. Griffin said, if you follow the black line that's perpendicular to Route 50 and go all the way down, there's a woods that comes out. That's right on our property line. And as he said, if we could do a buffer from there down to where the vegetation is.
So connect F essentially to that existing wood line?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
No, I think I got it. Thanks, Rob. I just, there was no terminal end that was discussed, and I just want to be clear what the thoughts were on that.
The very bitter end.
The White River.
I think just to be clear, there is no zoning requirement for a buffer between ag operations. But Mr. Fuchs and Mr. Rhodes, they have privately agreed to do this. So we will make sure that happens.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. So is there any other public comment?
Yeah, no one is waiting on Zoom or emails.
Thank you. I will now open it up for commission for discussion or motion and then discussion. I will ask for a second time. Is there a motion for or against? If we have no motion, then it shall go down as not approved.
I will make a motion that the Planning Commission regarding the request by Two Sons Farm LLC for minor site plan approval to construct a farm brewery consisting of 4,900 square feet of production building as well as a 4,752 square foot tasting building to include customer area and storage, and as more particularly described in Department of Planning and Zoning file SP number 20-07-0062, hereby finds this plan to be consistent with goals and objectives of the Queen Anne's County zoning and subdivision regulations in the 2010 comprehensive plan, and hereby grants minor site approval with the following conditions. Buildings are constructed consistent with the architectural elevations provided for approval. Any remaining edits and/or documents required by the Department of Public Works, Planning and Zoning, or other reviewing agency be reviewed and approved. Any required legal documents must be approved, signed, and recorded prior to obtaining final signatures for the minor site plan. All required estimates, bonds, sureties, review, and inspection fees must be submitted to the Department of Public Works and the Department of Planning and Zoning as appropriate, and that all required signatures must be obtained.
Second.
Who is the second by? I'm sorry. Mr. Ebersberger, thank you. So we'll open it up for discussion.
I'm curious as to the desires of the commission to, and also invite council to weigh in, and quite honestly, the property owners. Should we put a language about that buffer between those two properties?
That's fine.
To be sure that it moves forward? I'm all for gentlemen's agreements, but I've seen them go south.
No, that's fine.
Great.
He'll probably pick the expensive trees anyway.
He's a retired banker.
May I make an amendment to Ms. Diaz?
Yes.
And that is to install, was there a conversation about a width?
Yeah, 50 foot.
50-foot wide naturalized regenerative buffer between the applicant and the Mr. Rhodes property to the east, south.
I will amend my motion. I am not reading all of that again.
Understood.
To include the amendment that Commissioner Lee is offering.
As well my second.
All right. Is there any further discussion or comment? So, Mr. Tarleton, I do have one question for you for clarification. The required parking is 24 based off the square footage and use?
I'll talk into this microphone over here just to make it easy on everyone. Yes, based on our code standards now, we don't have an actual farm brewery section laid out in the parking standards. Our parking standards allow the planning director to refer to the most adequate or most like-kinded use for the actual parking standards to be utilized for a facility that doesn't necessarily fit the bill under a description. In this case, we indicated that the applicant should use the general parking standards for general commercial use as specified in our zoning code, and you'll see on their site plans they've provided those calculations. Originally, they had provided us calculations consistent with what would be required for a tavern. We told them that would be inappropriate in this case, as the operation, as they indicated, does not function as a tavern and would not be considered to be a tavern. So the most like-kinded use that we have in that case would be just a general commercial use.
Thank you.
I would, again, and maybe this goes to Amy as far as the question on, since we don't have a prior guideline on tourism breweries, is whether we've looked at the Baltimore County guidelines that have had these, guidelines and the adequacy of parking, which has been brought up by the chair. I mean, are we on top of what that looks like and should be?
Well, yes, the ordinance was amended to allow, you can't hear it. Yes. The farm brewery was added to the county code a few years ago, and it did look at the standards at the time. So even though a definition was added and the use was included in the definition of agriculture, staff had reviewed those matters at the time, and the way that Brendan reviewed the staff report and considered the space as commercial space is in line with the way that text amendment was reviewed. I think it was in, when was that, 2016? I was going to say 16 or 17. Right.
Thank you.
Any other questions, comments, or concerns regarding the brewery before we go to vote? Hearing none. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none.
Thank you, Commissioners.
Thank you very much.
Thirsty.
IPA, oyster stouts.
Well, the first car that gets stuck in the mud will be...
Next on our agenda was a break, but we just came back from a break, so we will entertain miscellaneous staff items.
It's a Freudian slip word.
Freudian, yes. You have 3 minutes according to, oh, sorry, just kidding.
I'll be even more brief than that. I just wanted to make sure that you noticed the memorandum that was in your packet that was submitted by the Partners for Economic Solutions. They're the organization that is working with our housing department to update the housing study. And similar to your comprehensive plan consultant, you've been given some homework because they're looking for your direct input as Planning Commission members on a few questions. So if you could, at your leisure, answer these questions, and let's see, trying to set an appropriate deadline for you to get us your responses. If you could return your answers to the 7 questions here, either by faxing them, emailing them to us. We could send you out an electronic version of this questionnaire, and then you can email it back to us within 2 weeks. Would that be okay?
So,
Thanks very much.
and you'll send the electronic document, correct?
I will.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Certainly.
About the comprehensive planning and the company. So, are you satisfied with this update that they have provided you?
I haven't had an opportunity to read it yet.
Okay.
We received it last evening.
Okay.
May I make a comment on that, or I feel like I should? I went back, as per our conversation last meeting, and the consultant in their presentation back in August laid out a graphic and a timeline, deliverables on one axis, calendar across the other axis, and they did suggest that they would meet with this board monthly. They also suggested that they would have visioning workshops between September and November, and special topics meetings in November.
That matter is been addressed with by me at Amy's request with the CEO of the consultant, and I think we lit a bit of a fire under a certain body part.
Thank you. This is a long process, already made longer, and now it's being made longer still.
I appreciate that, because
Yes.
I just feel I've been through this process in another area of my life, and I think that the longer that we are not, moving this along, and I feel like we've done a lot of homework, and I'm
It's
willing-
interesting that it's already morphed
willing
its
to do
title
more, but-
into the 2021 comprehensive plan right now.
Yes, I agree.
I'm led to understand that there's a conference call tomorrow with you and Todd and the honchos at the consulting firm.
Correct, and I share your concerns and have been vocal in sharing those concerns with our consultant, and I appreciate your attention to those details today, and I hope that we are on a firm track to meet those timelines that will have to be adjusted yet again. And once we have a new timeline established, I'm very hopeful to stick to it this time.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
It was a awkward conversation.
I know.
I can imagine.
Really shouldn't.
So, public comment?
Good morning again, Planning Commissioners. I just want to please take this opportunity to make everybody aware of a survey that's out there by the Department of Parks and Recreation in conjunction with the Beacon Group of Salisbury University, and that's a needs assessment survey for Parks and Recreation. And we encourage everyone to take it. The information that we collect, or that Beacon collects and provides us with the data and results of, it goes, works greatly to help us formulate new things, new rules and whatever, and acquisition and development of parks and recreation, open space areas. We are in the midst of our land preservation park and recreation plan, which is mandated by the state. DNR and MDP review it. And there's a lot of information in that. It, by way of reference, is part of the comp plan. So the information is really important to us, to help formulate that. And then that information is taken by the state, digested, and works itself into the state land preservation parks and recreation plan. So everything from ag preservation, open space, park use development, very, very instrumental in helping us along with that. So I encourage everybody to go to QAC.org. It's right there on the main page, and you can just click on the link, or there's a QR code, and it just takes a few minutes. So thank you.
Thank you, Nancy. Any other public comment? We shall close public comment. And I'll ask for a motion for adjournment.
So moved.
Hereby or adjourned. Thank you.